Section 1. The Yellow Skin Mystery. Let's start with something that you have looked at for your entire life without ever really looking at it. Every single person in Springfield is yellow. Not pale, not tan, not any shade that exists anywhere on the human spectrum. Yellow. The color of a ripe lemon, of a school bus, of a sticky note on someone's refrigerator door. Every man, woman, and child who calls Springfield home wears that same impossible shade of skin, and the show has been running for 36 years without a single character stopping to ask why. When you are a child watching this show, you accept it. Of course you do. Children accept the rules of cartoons the way they accept the rules of dreams without question, without hesitation, because questioning would interrupt the experience. The yellow is just part of the world. Homer is yellow. Marge is yellow. Bart and Lisa and Maggie and Moe and Ned Flanders and Principal Skinner and Chief Wiggum, all of them yellow. And that is simply the way things are in Springfield, and you move on. But here is where it starts to get strange. Quietly strange, the kind of strange that creeps up on you rather than announcing itself loudly. When you go back and look at the show with adult eyes, you start noticing something that should have been obvious all along. The yellow is not universal. It is not an artistic choice applied consistently to everyone who appears on screen. It is applied specifically to the people who live in Springfield. Visitors are different. Outsiders are different. Characters who arrive from other places, whether they are celebrities doing cameo appearances, or one-episode guests, or figures simply passing through town, are drawn with noticeably different proportions, noticeably more naturalistic skin tones, and features that more closely approximate what actual human anatomy looks like. The yellow is a local condition, and once you understand that, once you let that idea settle into place, the show starts to read in a fundamentally different way. Because if the yellow were simply an artistic decision, a stylistic choice made by the animation team to give the show a distinctive visual identity, it would be applied to everyone. It would not distinguish between residents and outsiders. It would not create a visible, observable difference between the people who live inside Springfield and the people who come from somewhere else. Matt Groening, the show's creator, has given the official explanation for the yellow skin on several occasions. He has stated in interviews that he chose yellow because it was a way to catch the attention of someone flipping through television channels. A flash of yellow, he argued, was immediately recognizable as The Simpsons. It was a branding decision, an aesthetic shorthand, a way of making the show visually distinctive in a television landscape full of shows drawn in more conventional palettes. On the surface, that explanation is perfectly reasonable. It makes sense as a production decision. It checks out as an answer at the most literal level. But it does not explain why the yellow stays inside Springfield's borders. It does not explain why, when actual guest stars have appeared when the show brought in real musicians, athletes, politicians, and cultural figures to voice animated versions of themselves, those characters consistently look different from the Springfield residents around them. The guest characters have rounder, more anatomically plausible eyes. Their proportions are more grounded. Their faces are less stylized, less distorted, more connected to the way actual human beings look. The Springfield residents, by contrast, have the bulging eyes, the four-fingered hands, the overbites, and the impossible hair that has become the show's signature visual language. If the yellow were pure branding, every character would have it. The show's art style would be applied uniformly across the entire cast. And it is not. The distinction exists. The yellow belongs to Springfield. Now pull back a little further and think about the timeline of the show. Springfield has had a nuclear power plant operating inside its borders for the entirety of its depicted history. That plant is run by a man who has been repeatedly shown to treat safety regulations as optional at best and irrelevant at worst. The cooling towers crack. The waste gets dumped into waterways. The facility employs a safety inspector who has, by the show's own accounting, logged hundreds of documented errors without ever being permanently removed from his position. The town's water supply runs downhill from that facility. The town's fish have mutated. The town's animals show signs of unusual development. And the people of Springfield have skin the color of radiation warning signs. The yellow skin theory, the one that sits near the surface of the iceberg but points down toward everything below, says that the color is not a stylistic choice at all. It is a symptom. It is what happens when a population spends generations drinking water that carries trace contamination from a facility with 342 documented safety violations. It is what happens when the air carries particles that no air was ever supposed to carry. It is what happens when the town's richest man decides that the cost of fixing the problem is higher than the cost of letting it continue. The yellow skin is the canary in the coal mine. It has been the canary for 36 years, and nobody in Springfield notices it because in Springfield, the canary has been yellow for so long that the color stopped registering as a warning. It just became the natural order of things. There are other physical details that cluster around this reading if you pay close attention. Homer's bone structure, for example. His skull does not conform to any recognizable human anatomy. The show acknowledges his unusual shape, has characters comment on it, has used it as the basis for physical comedy, but underneath the joke is a genuinely strange detail. A man whose cranial architecture does not match anything in the human evolutionary record. A man whose body absorbs punishment that would kill a normal person and then walks away from it again and again across decades of episodes without lasting consequence. He has been shot, electrocuted, fallen off cliffs, been hit by cars, survived explosions, and walked away from every single one of them. His healing rate is absurd by any biological standard. His pain tolerance is something that would deeply alarm any physician who encountered it in a real patient. And he has worked inside a nuclear facility in direct proximity to an active reactor core for the entirety of his adult life, which by itself would explain quite a lot about the physical anomalies the show never formally explains. The show has offered partial in-universe explanations. His neck fat cushions impacts that would snap a normal spine. His skull is unusually thick. These explanations are presented in the comedic register and are clearly not intended to fully account for the accumulated impossibility of his survival record. They are the show's polite cover story for something the narrative is not quite willing to state directly. And that something, the thing the cover story is covering for, fits neatly into the framework of a population whose biology has been quietly and persistently altered by decades of environmental contamination. Consider also the hair of the Simpson family. Marge's tower of blue rises from her head in a vertical column that defies gravity, that has maintained its precise shape for 36 years without apparent maintenance, that is so structurally improbable that real-world physics simply do not provide a framework for explaining it. The show has acknowledged this as a running joke. But the impossibility has never been explained. Not really. The tower is there because it has always been there. That is Springfield's answer to most things. Lisa's hair has the same quality of defying what hair does. Bart's spikes maintain their shape through rain, through water, through situations that should flatten them. Maggie's bow sits in a fixed position atop a head that never changes. Every member of the family carries a physical signature that the normal rules of human biology cannot account for. And the show presents these signatures as simply who these people are, rather than as evidence of something that has happened to them. Now consider the timing of the contamination. The show began in 1989, but Springfield has had a nuclear power plant for considerably longer than that, Mr. Burns has been running the facility for decades before the first episode, which means that by the time Homer Simpson was born, his parents had already been living in contaminated conditions for years. By the time Bart and Lisa and Maggie were born, 3 generations of the family had been immersed in the same environment. Environmental effects on human biology are not always immediate. They are not always dramatic. The subtlest and most persistent effects are the ones that accumulate slowly, over years and generations, until the altered baseline becomes the new normal, until the children born into the altered environment have no reference point for what the unaltered version of themselves might have looked like. They would not know that the yellow was unusual. They would not know that the 4 fingers were unusual. They would not know that their healing capacity, their physical resilience, the specific ways their bodies had adapted to the environment they had been born into, they would not know that any of this was different from what bodies were supposed to be. It would simply be the way bodies are. The fish in Springfield's river developed a third eye. This was presented as a notable event. It attracted national attention. It was used as political ammunition against Burns. It created a moment of apparent public reckoning with the question of what the plant was doing to the local ecosystem. And then the town moved on. The fish remained 3-eyed. And the question of what was happening to the other organisms, the organisms that drank from the same river, breathed the same air, lived in the same contaminated zone, was simply not asked. The answer to that question has been sitting in plain sight every single episode. It is yellow. It has 4 fingers on each hand. It has eyes that bulge slightly beyond the range of normal human anatomy. It survives things that no normal body could survive, and it forgets things that no normal mind could forget, and it accepts a reality that no normally functioning critical faculty would accept without question. The yellow skin is not a stylistic choice. It is the most visible piece of evidence of what Springfield has done to the people who live there. And the most unsettling part is not that the evidence exists. It is that it has been visible for 36 years, in millions of homes, on screens large and small, watched by generations of people who accepted it completely just as Springfield's residents accept it completely, because the color has been there for so long that it stopped looking like something worth asking about. Springfield trained its viewers the same way it trained its citizens, through repetition, through normalization, through the slow erosion of the instinct that says something about this is not right. We watched the yellow, we laughed, we came back next week, we watched it again. And somewhere in the background, behind the comedy, the cooling towers kept cracking, and the water kept running, and the color kept being passed down through generations that never thought to ask why they looked the way they looked. Because that is what Springfield does. It makes the abnormal ordinary. It makes the alarming comfortable. It makes the evidence of serious harm into the wallpaper of daily life. And we helped. Drop a comment right now telling us where you are and what time it is wherever you are watching from. And if this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribing genuinely makes a difference. Now, let's keep going. Section 2. The Secret Life of Apu Nahasapi Mapatilon. There is a shop at the center of Springfield that has been open every hour of every day for as long as anyone can remember. The Quickie Mart does not close. It does not take holidays. Its fluorescent lights hum through the night while the rest of the town sleeps, casting a pale glow across the parking lot where moths circle in slow, patient orbits. And behind the counter, through every shift, through every season, through every catastrophe that has rolled through Springfield and out the other side, stands Apu Nahasapi Mapatilon. He is, by almost any measure, the hardest-working character in the history of the show. He holds a PhD in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Technology, an institution he attended on a full academic scholarship before immigrating to the United States. He runs a business that operates around the clock, manages its inventory, handles its finances, maintains its equipment, and serves its customers with a courtesy and patience that would exhaust most people within a week. He is a devoted husband and the father of octuplets 8 children born simultaneously, whom he is raising while working a schedule that should make it biologically impossible to spend meaningful time with any of them. He speaks 4 languages. He holds a black belt in a martial art. He is an accomplished musician. He once worked without sleeping for 3 days and 11 hours as a result of extreme corporate pressure, and documented the experience with the calm precision of someone who simply accepted that this was what his life required. Apu is one of the most fully realized characters on the show. He has a complete backstory, a rich inner life, and more depth than many characters who receive far more screen time. And underneath all of that depth, if you look carefully at the details the show has scattered across his many appearances, you find a story that is genuinely dark in ways the comedy never quite stops to acknowledge. Let's start with the visa situation, because this is the detail that sets everything else in motion. Apu came to the United States on a student visa to attend Springfield University. When his visa expired, he did not leave. He stayed. He overstayed his visa and became, by legal definition, an undocumented immigrant in the country he had made his home. He built his entire life in Springfield, the career, the business, the community connections, the relationships while existing in a state of legal precarity that gave the people and institutions around him enormous leverage over him if they ever chose to use it. The show addresses this directly in the episode Much Apu About Nothing, which aired in 1996. Springfield becomes caught up in an anti-immigration fever after the mayor proposes a ballot measure Proposition 24 that would deport all illegal immigrants from the state. The town, which had been furious at the government for spending money on a bear patrol it did not need, redirects that anger toward immigrants when the mayor reframes the budget problem as being caused by illegal residents rather than by wasteful spending. The mechanism is depicted with clarity. People who are angry and confused are handed a target, and the target is given a face and a name, and the genuine sources of their frustration are quietly moved off stage while the redirected anger does its work. The emotional center of the episode is Apu, who faces deportation back to a country he has not lived in for over 2 decades, and Homer, who decides to help him pass the citizenship test. In the process, Homer learns enough about American history and civics to feel genuinely embarrassed that he did not already know it. The episode works in both registers as satire and as a story about Apu specifically, and the combination produces something more substantial than either would achieve alone. Apu passes the test. He becomes a citizen. The episode resolves the immediate crisis in Apu's favor, which is the right outcome and is handled with appropriate warmth. But the episode also contains a detail that the comedy moves past without lingering on. And the detail matters. Apu has been living in the United States without legal status for approximately 20 years before the events of that episode. 20 years. He ran a business during those 20 years. He paid taxes. He served the community. He built a life. And for all 20 of those years, every interaction he had with any figure of authority, every visit from a health inspector, every encounter with the police, every brush with any bureaucratic institution occurred under the shadow of the fact that his presence in the country was technically illegal and could be ended at any time by anyone who decided to make it their business. Think about what that does to a person's psychology over 2 decades. You become very careful. You become very accommodating. You become someone who does not make waves, does not draw attention, does not complain about the conditions of his employment or the treatment he receives from customers or the corporate structure that governs his working life. You become, through the specific mechanism of sustained precarity, someone who has learned that survival depends on being found acceptable by the people around you, which means being useful and pleasant and undemanding, and never the source of a problem that someone with legal authority over you might decide to address. This is not a stretch or an overreach. The show gives you all of this information. It tells you that Apu overstayed his visa. It tells you that he built his life during that period. And then it shows you, across dozens of episodes, a man who accepts conditions of employment that no one with full legal standing and full legal options would accept with the equanimity Apu displays. The Quick E-Mart is a franchise operation. Apu does not own the store independently. He manages it on behalf of a parent corporation headquartered in India, run by a figure the show refers to as the CEO or the squishy master, who is depicted as monumentally indifferent to the conditions his franchise operators face. The corporation wants the store to be open and the shelves to be stocked and the customer satisfaction scores to meet the minimum threshold, and beyond those requirements, what happens to the person managing the store is not something the corporation has organized itself to care about. The store is in a constant state of disrepair. The hot dogs have been rotating on the rollers since a date the show implies predates most of the customers' memories. The squishy machine breaks regularly and is repaired with solutions that should not work but do, because Apu has learned through necessity to keep equipment running long past the point where any rational assessment would say it should be replaced. The walk-in cooler is maintained through processes that are never fully depicted, but whose results suggest an ongoing negotiation between Apu's ingenuity and the limitations of aging equipment. There is an episode in which Apu is sent to a corporate retreat when it appears that he might be replaced by an automated checkout system. The retreat is essentially a re-indoctrination program, designed to remind franchise operators that their loyalty to the corporation supersedes their own judgment, their own comfort, and their own sense of what constitutes reasonable working conditions. It is run with the specific energy of an institution that understands that people can be managed effectively if you can keep them from thinking about their situation clearly for long enough to restore their compliance. Apu returns from the retreat more committed to the Quick E-Mart than he was when he left. The episode treats this as his victory. He kept his job. The automation threat was averted. The storyline resolves in his favor. But what was actually won deserves more attention. He was sent to a program specifically designed to dissolve whatever resistance he had built up to the conditions of his employment, and the program worked. He came back a more compliant employee. The institution sent in a man with doubts and got back a man without them. Then there is the marriage. Manjula enters the show through an arranged marriage organized by Apu's mother back in India, an agreement Apu had made many years earlier before he fully understood what he was committing to. The marriage is presented with genuine warmth. Apu and Manjula do fall in love. They build something real together. Their relationship becomes one of the more convincingly drawn partnerships in the show's history, and the episodes that track their early marriage are among the more emotionally honest romantic storylines the show has produced. But before Manjula, Apu had a girlfriend. an American woman with whom he had been in a long-term relationship. When Manjula arrives and Apu reveals that he is bound by the earlier arrangement, that relationship ends. The show does not spend much time on this moment, but it contains something worth sitting with. Apu spent years building a life in the United States, building relationships, building a version of himself that fit the country he had chosen, and then found himself bound to a commitment made in a completely different context by a younger version of himself who was agreeing to something in a culture he was about to leave behind. The weight of that being caught between two worlds, between two versions of your life, is present in the show if you are willing to feel it underneath the jokes. Then there are the octuplets. 8 children, born simultaneously, which the show treats as a comic milestone, a spectacular event that Springfield turns into a spectacle, with corporations competing to sponsor the children and reporters camping outside the hospital. The comedy of the spectacle is real and it lands. But what follows the spectacle is the reality of the situation, and the show does not fully examine that reality. Apu works somewhere in the range of 80 to 100 hours per week at the Quickie Mart. He has always worked those hours. After the octuplets are born, he has 8 children at home who need a parent who is physically present, who is actually there, in the house, in the room, available in the way that small children need a parent to be available, and the hours do not change. The Quickie Mart is still open. The fluorescent lights are still on. Apu is still behind the counter. The show acknowledges the tension this creates in a storyline where Apu has an affair that begins in part because Apu and Manjula have grown so distant under the pressure of their circumstances that they have become strangers to each other. The affair is discovered. The marriage is nearly destroyed. The resolution involves Apu making promises and gestures of reconciliation that the episode treats as satisfying. But the structural conditions that produce the estrangement are not addressed by the reconciliation. He still works the same hours. He still runs the same store. The store still does not close. What the show also leaves largely unexplored is what Apu's life cost him in the hardest-to-measure dimension. Not financially, not legally, but in the dimension of what his capabilities might have produced in a different set of circumstances. He has a PhD in computer science. He was a scholar. He was trained to do things with his mind that the Quickie Mart does not require and actively prevents, because running a 24-hour convenience store is a total occupation of a person's time and energy. The degree is not gone. The training is not erased. But neither of them was ever given the space they would have needed to produce the outcomes they were pointing toward. This is not a tragedy in the dramatic sense. Apu is not despairing. He has warmth, purpose, family, community. He has a life that is real and full and genuinely his own in important ways. The show has been careful to depict him as a person with genuine richness, rather than simply as a figure of pathos. But the life he has and the life he might have had exist in the same frame, separated by the specific circumstances that directed one toward the Quickie Mart and away from everything else. And the fluorescent lights hum, and the store does not close. And somewhere behind the courtesy and the patience and the endurance that Springfield has always relied on without quite acknowledging what it costs, Apu is still there. The lights are on, they have always been on, they will be on when you finish this and when you go to sleep and when you wake up tomorrow. Section 3. Bart Simpson's Hidden Trauma. Bart Simpson is the chaos engine at the center of the show. He is 10 years old and has been 10 years old for the entire run of the series. He skateboards through Springfield with an abandon that the show presents as pure joy, leaves a trail of pranks and property damage in his wake, and drives the adults around him, his parents, his teachers, his principal, to the edge of their patience on a near-daily basis. He is the id of the Simpson family, the element that cannot be contained, and the show has built many of its best and most memorable episodes around the specific energy he brings to every situation he enters. He is also, if you read his history carefully, one of the most consistently traumatized characters in the series. The trauma is not presented directly. The show is not a drama. It does not have the structure or the inclination to sit with damage the way a more serious format might. But the details are there, distributed across seasons and episodes, and when you collect them and look at them together, the picture of Bart Simpson that emerges is considerably more complicated than the anarchic 10-year-old the opening credits present. Start with the relationship with Homer. Homer strangles Bart. This is one of the show's longest-running recurring bits. Bart does something that frustrates Homer. Homer grabs Bart by the throat with both hands, Bart's eyes bulge, and the family moves on. It is treated as comedy throughout. The strangling is always in response to something legitimately exasperating, and the exasperation is usually justified given what Bart has done, and the show plays the physical comedy for its absurdist value without presenting it as anything other than a running gag. Except it is also, by any clinical definition, abuse. An adult physically choking a child in response to frustration is abuse, regardless of how the action is framed. The show knows this because there are episodes that acknowledge the harm directly. Some storylines link the strangling to Homer's own childhood, to his own experiences of being parented in ways that left lasting marks. There are moments when the show's awareness of what it is depicting breaks through the comedic register and becomes briefly visible. But the awareness never accumulates into a full reckoning. The comedy always reasserts itself. The strangling happens, Bart survives, the episode continues, and the pattern resets. What the strangling does, cumulatively, is establish a very particular dynamic. It establishes that Homer's affection for Bart is genuine and deep. This has never been ambiguous. Homer loves Bart ferociously and consistently, but that the love coexists with a volatility that Bart has to navigate every single day. Homer can shift from warmth to physical aggression with a speed that has no reliable warning. Bart cannot predict with confidence which Homer he is going to encounter when he walks through the door or says the wrong thing at the wrong moment. Children who grow up in environments where love and unpredictable anger exist side by side develop specific adaptations to that environment. They become hyper-aware of the emotional states of the adults around them. They develop a social radar that is always scanning, always reading the room, always trying to assess whether the current moment is safe or whether something is about to shift. They also frequently develop a tendency toward externalized behavior, toward acting out in ways that draw reactions, because at some level, a predictable negative response is less frightening than the uncertainty of an environment that can change without warning. A controlled reaction, even a bad one, is more manageable than an uncontrolled one. This is a clinical reality of how children respond to unpredictable home environments. It is also, almost precisely, a description of how Bart behaves. The pranks, the disruption, the constant testing of every boundary he encounters look at this behavior through the lens of what his home life has trained him to do, and it becomes considerably more legible. He needs to find the edges of every situation. He needs to know where the walls are. He needs to know what happens when things break down, because in his experience, things do break down, and being prepared for it is the only form of control available to someone in his position. He does not think about it this way. He is 10 years old, and the show does not require him to have sophisticated insight into his own motivations. But the behavior pattern is there, consistent across 36 years of episodes. Then there is school. Bart's academic difficulties are a cornerstone of the show. He is a poor student, consistently and persistently. He struggles to read. He struggles to maintain focus for extended periods. He is frequently threatened with being held back a year, and in at least one prominent storyline, the threat becomes real enough that he faces the actual prospect of repeating his grade. His relationship with school is adversarial. He sees it as a place designed to expose his deficiencies and to confirm, through the formal mechanism of grading and assessment, what he has already been told in a dozen less formal ways. The Season 2 premiere, Bart Gets an F, is one of the most watched and most discussed episodes in the show's history, and it earned that status because it does something the show rarely does with Bart. It takes his struggle completely seriously. In that episode, Bart is facing the real possibility of being held back a year. He makes a genuine, sustained effort to study, not a perfunctory gesture, not a half-hearted attempt, but a real investment of the effort that Bart actually has available to him when he is not deploying it toward chaos. And on the day of the test, it snows. Springfield gets a snowstorm significant enough to cancel school, and Bart, who had been preparing, celebrates the cancellation with the same abandon as every other kid in Springfield, abandoning his studying, playing in the snow, doing everything a 10-year-old does when an unexpected reprieve arrives. The next day, he fails the test anyway. He is devastated. The episode ends with Bart crying in his room, genuinely crying, with a rawness that the show rarely allows its characters to display while the snow melts outside his window. The episode is excellent and well regarded, but what it reveals about Bart is worth sitting with. His failure is not a failure of intelligence. The show is careful about this. He is not stupid in the way the show's easy categorization of him might suggest. His failure is a failure of executive function, the capacity to maintain focus and discipline over time, to hold a long-term goal in place against the pull of immediate experience. This is a specific kind of difficulty, recognizable and well documented in clinical literature, and it is also a difficulty that the educational system around him has consistently interpreted as willful defiance rather than as something that might benefit from understanding and support. Nobody at Springfield Elementary ever says, "This child might have a learning difference that makes traditional academic performance difficult." Nobody says, "Let us find out what Bart can do and build from there." The school's response to Bart is consistently punitive, consistently focused on managing his behavior rather than understanding what produces it. And so Bart learns that institutions are adversaries. He learns that the rules of institutions are things used against him rather than structures designed to support him. He responds to this by finding the angles, by looking for the ways around systems rather than through them, because through them has never worked and he stopped believing it would a long time ago. There is also the matter of his relationship with Lisa. Lisa is 2 years younger than Bart, and has been, since the show began, everything that Bart is not. Where Bart struggles academically, Lisa excels. Where Bart is dismissed as a troublemaker, Lisa is celebrated as a prodigy. Where Bart brings home notes from teachers and provokes sighs and eye rolls, Lisa brings home awards and produces in her parents the particular kind of pride that comes from watching a child exceed every expectation. The show explores the complexity of this dynamic with more sensitivity than it sometimes receives credit for. Bart and Lisa are beneath the sibling rivalry and the competition and the moments of genuine antagonism devoted to each other. They have protected each other, stood up for each other, sacrificed for each other in ways that the comedy sometimes obscures but never fully erases. Their love is real. But the dynamic is also genuinely painful for Bart in ways that accumulate over years. He watches his sister be everything he cannot manage to be, in the same house, every day, in front of the same parents. He watches his parents' faces when Lisa does something remarkable, and then watches those same faces when they look at his latest report card or receive another call from Principal Skinner. He is aware the show has been clear about this across many episodes of the gap between what Lisa represents and what he represents in the eyes of the adults whose regard matters most to him. There are episodes where Bart succeeds, where he does something genuinely well, demonstrates competence and capability in areas that the school's metrics never measure. He is a natural leader in certain contexts. He is creative and resourceful. He has the kind of interpersonal charisma that makes people follow him. He has performed, acted, demonstrated real capabilities in non-academic arenas that suggest a person of genuine depth operating in a context that cannot see it. But these moments are episodic. They do not accumulate into a sustained sense of worth the way Lisa's academic achievements accumulate into a sustained identity. Bart's competence is situational and context-dependent, visible only when the right situation arises. His value in the accounting that Springfield does of its children is persistently negative. He is a debit in the ledger, the source of problems rather than solutions. He carries this. Under the skateboard and the slingshot and the pranks and the catchphrases, under all the bright, rebellious energy the show has made his brand, he carries the specific weight of being the child the world has decided is not worth the trouble of understanding. The show has given Bart moments of genuine emotional depth that suggest the writers understand who he is underneath the surface. There is the episode where he befriends a lonely old man who is dying. There is the episode where he develops a real feeling for a girl who sees through his persona to something genuine beneath it, and then she moves away. There is the episode where he discovers that the one arena where he has a natural talent performance, the ability to hold an audience, to read a room and give it what it needs, is the one arena that nobody in his life has ever thought to cultivate or support. These moments are consistent enough in what they point toward that the picture is legible even without being formally drawn. What they point toward is a child who needed more than Springfield's institutions were capable of giving him. A child who was funny and creative and charismatic, and who learned, through years of being categorized as a problem, to be proud of the categorization because pride was more sustainable than grief. Bart Simpson has been 10 years old for 36 years. He has been in the same grade, failing the same tests, getting the same phone calls from school, carrying the same weight in the same town where the same adults have been underestimating him since before most of the show's current viewers were born. If you let yourself feel that, Rather than simply watch it, it starts to seem less like a comedy premise and more like a sentence that nobody ever thought to appeal. Number. Section 4. The Springfield Elementary Conspiracy. Springfield Elementary School sits on a hill at the edge of town, close enough to the nuclear power plant that on certain days the shadow of the cooling towers falls across the playground at recess. This is not an accident of urban planning. In a town where one man controls the economy, the infrastructure, and by extension the political mechanisms that determine where things get built, the positioning of the school relative to the plant tells you something about how seriously the health of the town's children has ever been treated as a priority. It is either an accident so convenient that it stopped being an accident at some point, or it was a decision made by someone who understood the relationship between an underfunded school and a compliant future workforce. The school is, by any reasonable educational standard, a disaster. It is chronically underfunded. Its facilities are in a state of consistent disrepair. Its staff ranges from the dedicated but overwhelmed to the actively indifferent, with very little in the middle. Its administration is run by a man whose entire identity is built on a fiction, whose military heroism belongs to someone else, and whose relationship with his mother is so psychologically loaded that it has affected his professional judgment across 36 years of depicted service. But the most interesting thing about Springfield Elementary is not its failures. It is what those failures protect. A public school's fundamental purpose is the education and development of the children entrusted to it. This includes academic instruction, obviously, but also the social and emotional development of those children, the cultivation of their capacity for critical thinking, and the preparation of their minds for the world they will inhabit as adults. A school that does this well produces graduates who can ask questions, evaluate information, identify manipulation, and resist exploitation. Springfield Elementary does this poorly in ways that are so consistent and so specifically targeted at exactly the capacities that would allow its students to recognize and challenge the conditions of their town, that the pattern begins to look less like incompetence and more like policy. Consider the curriculum. The show has depicted Springfield Elementary's academic content across dozens of episodes, and the picture that emerges is of an educational program remarkably light on the subjects that build critical capacity. Science, when it appears, is underfunded and often incorrect. History is taught from textbooks so out of date that they constitute a deliberate exclusion of recent events from the record. Art and music, the subjects that most reliably develop the imagination and the ability to engage with ambiguity and complexity, are the first things to be cut when the budget is tight. And the budget is always tight. The budget at Springfield Elementary has been tight for as long as the show has depicted it, which raises the question of why an institution serving the children of a town with a functioning nuclear power plant and a billionaire employer cannot maintain the basic resources required to deliver an education worth receiving. The money exists in Springfield. It exists in enormous quantities. It flows primarily toward one man who has structured the town's economy to ensure that as much of the value it generates as possible flows toward him, and as little as possible disperses into the community he exploits. The school cannot afford decent textbooks because the man who owns the plant that employs the school's students' parents has ensured that the plant's profits leave Springfield rather than circulate within it. The school cannot attract or retain good teachers because good teachers cost money, and the money is not there. It is not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. It does not require Burns to have attended a meeting where he said explicitly, "Keep that school underfunded so the children cannot think." It requires only that his economic priorities produce the outcomes they produce, and that he understands as he clearly does the relationship between an educated population and a population that will hold him accountable for what his plant is doing. A well-funded Springfield Elementary would be able to hire teachers who teach science well enough that students could understand what a nuclear power plant's waste products do to a water supply. It could teach history thoroughly enough that students would understand how economic power shapes civic institutions. It could produce graduates with the critical capacity to look at their town and ask the questions that the town has been carefully, persistently preventing from being asked. An underfunded Springfield Elementary produces graduates who are grateful for what they get, who accept the world as it is presented to them, who have been trained by a decade of inadequate education to understand that asking questions that make the people in authority uncomfortable is a behavior that gets you sent to the principal's office. Now look at the administration more closely. Principal Skinner has run Springfield Elementary since before the show began. He is a figure of profound contradictions, simultaneously a strict disciplinarian and a man too psychologically compromised by his relationship with his mother to exercise genuine authority. He fears Agnes Skinner with a completeness that borders on the pathological. He has made career decisions and disciplinary decisions based not on what is best for the students in his care, but on what will least provoke the woman who has been controlling him since long before he became a principal. Skinner is not a villain. The show has been careful about this across its entire run. He is, in many respects, a tragic figure, a man who might have been competent and even compassionate in a different life, who is prevented from becoming either by the accumulated weight of his own history. He was not always Skinner. He was Armin Tamzarian, a street kid from the wrong side of a different town, who stumbled into an identity that was not his and found it fit him well enough that he wore it for 20 years without being caught. The man running the school is someone who has been performing an identity that is not his for decades. He cannot be fully authentic in his role, because authentic engagement would require disclosing the fiction. He is managing the institution while simultaneously managing the secret of his own existence within it, and the energy required for that management is energy that is not available for the actual work of leading a school. And so the school drifts. It maintains itself through the accumulated habits of an institution that has been running for long enough that its procedures are self-sustaining. Skinner manages situations. He handles crises. He ensures that the minimum that must be done is done. But he does not lead, not in the sense that leadership requires someone who is fully present in the role and fully willing to advocate loudly for what the institution needs. Then there is groundskeeper Willie. Willie is the school's groundskeeper, maintenance person, and general all-purpose labor source. He is Scottish. He works in conditions that would violate health and safety standards in any jurisdiction that takes those standards seriously. He is paid inadequately, and he sleeps in a shack on school grounds because his compensation does not allow him to live anywhere else. He is essential. The school cannot function without him. Without Willie, the building would not have functioning heat through the winter. The grounds would not be maintained, the gym equipment would not work, and half a dozen other physical systems would fail within a week. He is the person on whose labor the entire institution rests, and he is treated as expendable. He is fired and rehired with a frequency that suggests the administration genuinely believes he is replaceable, despite all evidence to the contrary. He is insulted and dismissed by the people around him. He lives in a shack. The lesson Springfield Elementary teaches its students about labor is not in the curriculum, and not in any lesson plan. But children absorb what they see around them more reliably than they absorb what they are told. What they see is Willie, the man whose work makes the building function, reduced to the lowest status in the institution whose functioning he makes possible. What they learn from watching that is that essential physical work is worth very little. That maintenance, the actual work of ensuring that systems continue to function, is beneath the notice of anyone with aspirations beyond it. This is a useful lesson for a society whose economy depends on people doing essential work for inadequate compensation without questioning the arrangement. Springfield Elementary teaches it thoroughly, in a school that was never designed to teach its students anything that might lead them to question the world around them. The conspiracy at Springfield Elementary is not dramatic. It does not require secret meetings or explicit instructions. It requires only that the right things be underfunded and the wrong things be tolerated, year after year, until the outcome is so normalized that it stops looking like a choice and starts looking like the natural order of things. The shadow of the cooling towers falls across the playground at recess. The children play underneath it, and nobody thinks to ask why the school was built there in the first place. Number. Section 5. Moe's Tavern, the darkest bar in animation. There is a bar in Springfield that has no obvious reason to be as successful as it is. Most businesses exist because they fill a need, occupy a market, offer something that the people around them want badly enough to pay for. Moe's Tavern does all of this. It sells alcohol to people who want alcohol. It provides a space for men who want to drink together. By those metrics, it occupies a completely comprehensible place in Springfield's commercial landscape. But Moe's Tavern is different from other bars in a way that becomes clear if you spend enough time inside it. Other bars try to be pleasant. They try, to varying degrees, to create an atmosphere that makes people want to return. The lighting, the decor, the music, the way the staff treats the customers, all of these elements are calibrated. In any functioning hospitality business, toward making the experience agreeable enough that you come back. Moe's Tavern does not try to be pleasant. The lighting is bad. The decor is a masterwork of accumulated neglect, as though every surface decided many years ago to stop trying and has been faithful to that decision ever since. The drinks are, depending on the episode, either mediocre or actively dangerous. The walls have not been cleaned in a period of time that the show leaves deliberately unspecified but which the visual evidence suggests is significant. And yet the bar is always full of the same people. Homer, Barney, Lenny, Carl, the core social group that orbits Moe's Tavern, with the reliable gravity of bodies that have found their orbit and stopped looking for another. They are there every day. They are there after work and on weekends and during events that most people would attend with different company in different settings. Moe's is not a place they go for a particular occasion. It is a place they go because it is where they go, and the habit of going there has calcified over so many years that it no longer requires a conscious decision. The show uses this as a comedy premise. The regulars at Moe's are a found family of sorts, bound together by proximity and habit. And that reading is correct, as far as it goes. The warmth between these men is genuine. The friendship is real, expressed in the specific way these particular men express friendship, which involves a great deal of shared silence and mutual tolerance rather than emotional articulation. But the warmth and the friendship are not the whole story. They are the surface of a story that goes considerably darker if you follow it all the way down. Moe's Tavern is not a place where significant personal development happens. Nobody at Moe's Tavern becomes a better version of themselves as a result of spending time there. Nobody resolves a problem, improves a relationship, discovers a new direction, or makes a decision that leads to meaningful positive change in their life because of time spent on those bar stools. The bar is, in the most precise clinical sense, a place where people go to not deal with their lives for a few hours. It is an avoidance mechanism that has been institutionalized through years of repetition into a ritual that feels, from the inside, like community. Homer goes to Moe's to escape from the pressures of his job, his marriage, his family, his financial situation, and the accumulated weight of being a person in the world. These are legitimate pressures. Many of them are severe. He has real reasons for needing a place to decompress. But the decompression he finds at Moe's does not address any of those reasons. It suspends them. It puts them on hold for the duration of the time he spends in the bar and then returns them, unchanged, when he leaves. The problems are always waiting at the door. They are never different when he gets home. The bar does not solve anything. It only delays the experience of the unsolved things. This is the specific quality of certain kinds of addiction that is hardest to name and hardest to address. Not the dramatic physical dependency, not the crisis that arrives with undeniable force, but the quiet daily choice to postpone something that never actually becomes easier to face by being postponed. The bar is where you go instead of going home. And eventually the bar is part of home, and going home means going through the bar first, and the two have become so entangled that separating them requires something that nobody in Homer's life has ever provided a clear view of what the pattern is doing to him, and a reason to believe that what he would find if he stopped postponing would be worth finding. Now let's look at Moe himself, because Moe is the central figure here. Moe Seeslock is one of the show's great achievements, a character who exists at the intersection of comedy and genuine darkness, who generates laughs through his misery while simultaneously being a figure of real pathos. He is deeply lonely. He has been single for the entirety of the show's run, with occasional exceptions that prove the rule. Brief relationships that flame out, or fall apart, because Moe's fundamental damage is not something he can sustain a healthy relationship through. He has attempted suicide multiple times on the show. Some of these moments are handled with more seriousness than others, but the accumulation of them tells you something that the comedy cannot fully contain. An accumulation of suicide attempts is a clinical indicator of significant and sustained suffering, and the show acknowledges this suffering with one side of its mouth while deflecting it with the other, which is not the most honest approach to the material, but is probably the only approach available within the format. Moe is a man who has decided, on some level he may not even be fully conscious of, that his life is not worth the trouble of changing. He runs a failing bar in a bad part of Springfield. He serves the same small group of regulars who, while genuinely fond of him, are not sources of nourishment or growth. He answers prank calls from Bart with an increasingly ritualized fury that has long since lost whatever genuine anger it once contained, and become performance a habit that happens automatically, rather than something that is chosen. The show has revealed Moe's backstory in fragments. The picture that assembles is of a man whose life was shaped by circumstances far outside his control before he was old enough to exert any control over them. He grew up poor. He experienced significant hardship. He had a brief period of something different. There are suggestions across various episodes that he was once a child actor or had some fleeting brush with a version of his life that pointed somewhere other than the bar before the trajectory of his existence bent toward where it is now and stayed there. He bought Moe's Tavern because it was available and affordable, and because his alternatives were narrower than they should have been. He has been running it ever since, watching the same regulars come and go, answering the same prank calls, polishing the same glasses with the same rag whose cleanliness is genuinely questionable, watching the years go by through windows that never quite let in enough light. There is an episode, a genuinely extraordinary one, in which Moe is given access to a therapy session, and the things that emerge from it are dark enough that the show retreats quickly back to comedy. But for a few minutes, the armor comes down and what is underneath it is visible. A man who has been suffering consistently and quietly for a very long time, and who does not believe, at a deep and foundational level, that anything will ever be different. He polishes the glass. The rag is dirty. The glass ends up no cleaner than it was. He sets it down and picks up another one. And the regulars drink, and the hours pass, and nobody at Moe's Tavern gets anywhere. That is the most honest thing the show has ever said about what the bar is. Barney Gumble deserves specific attention here, because his story is the most dramatic illustration of what Moe's Tavern does to the people it serves. Barney was accepted to Harvard. This is a canonical fact. The show has established a piece of backstory that transforms Barney from a comedy archetype into something considerably more complicated. He was, at some point, a person of significant academic achievement, someone whose capabilities were recognized at the highest levels of American higher education. He had a future of a specific kind in front of him. The alcohol changed that trajectory. The show traces the beginning of Barney's drinking in fragments, a backstory involving Homer, involving a first beer at a social event, and then the trajectory bending and not straightening. The origin is almost absurdly small given what it produces. A beer, and then another, and then the trajectory bends and the Harvard future recedes and the barstool at Moe's becomes the permanent present. Barney is brilliant in flashes. He makes a film. He demonstrates insights across various episodes. He speaks with a clarity and precision that remind you what the Harvard admissions office saw in him. These moments of genuine capability are always brief. The show does not sustain them, because sustaining them would require allowing Barney to change, and the format does not allow that. He returns to the barstool. He returns to the beer. The Harvard future sits somewhere in the past, unvisited, in a version of his life that branched off in a different direction and was never taken back. And Moe's Tavern is where the path ended up. For Barney, for Homer, for Lenny and Carl, for everyone who has found in that specific failing bar an environment that accepts them exactly as they arrive and never asks them to be anything more than what they already are. It is the most comfortable trap in Springfield. And there is no shortage of comfortable traps in Springfield. Number, Section 6. Lisa Simpson's Doomed Future. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she is the most endangered person in Springfield. The danger Lisa faces is more specific and more serious than the physical danger that periodically threatens the other Simpsons, and it does not get reset the way physical danger does. Lisa is brilliant. This is one of the show's foundational facts. She has an IQ the show has placed between 156 and 159, putting her in a category of intellectual ability that is, by any statistical measure, extraordinarily rare. She plays the saxophone with genuine skill. She is a committed vegetarian and Buddhist in a family and community that regard both as eccentric at best. She reads literature that most adults in Springfield have never heard of. She engages with political and philosophical ideas with the seriousness of someone who genuinely cares about the world those ideas describe. And she is completely isolated by all of it. The isolation is the thing the show has depicted most honestly about Lisa, and it is the thing that the show's comedy format requires it to never fully resolve. Lisa's intelligence separates her from her peers, from her family, from virtually every institutional structure around her. She is too advanced for her school, which cannot meet her where she is and does not particularly try to. She is too serious for her social environment, where being smart is treated as a social liability. She is too idealistic for Springfield's fundamentally cynical civic landscape, where the response to good intentions is typically either indifference or mild ridicule. The show has imagined Lisa's future in several forward-looking episodes, and the picture that emerges is surprisingly consistent. Lisa becomes a young woman of significant achievement. She attends a university that can finally meet her intellectually. She enters a field where her intelligence and her commitment to ethical action find some form of institutional expression. She is successful by the metrics that measure success in the world outside Springfield. She is also, in almost every imagined future, lonely. The most famous of these glimpses is Lisa's wedding, the season 6 episode that flashes forward to Lisa at 23, engaged to a young Englishman named Hugh Parkfield whom she met at university. The episode is beautiful and carefully made and genuinely moving, and its emotional core is the tension between who Lisa has become, a confident, accomplished young woman finally in an environment that can accommodate what she is and where she came from, which is Springfield, and the family it contains. The engagement falls apart because Hugh cannot accept Lisa's family. He finds them unbearable. He wants to take Lisa away from all of it and build a life somewhere clean and sophisticated and far from everything that shaped her. And Lisa cannot go with him, not all the way. Not because she loves Springfield without reservation. The show has never pretended her relationship with the town is simple, but because the family is not separable from who she is. Homer and Marge and Bart are not background noise in Lisa's story. They are its structure, its foundation, the thing that organizes everything else even when everything else has moved very far away from them. The engagement ends. Hugh leaves. Lisa returns to Springfield. The flash forward closes. She is 8 years old again. This is the show's recurring answer to the question of Lisa's future. She escapes and then she comes back. The love that brings her home is real, and it is also, depending on how you read it, either sustaining or consuming the thing that grounds her or the thing that limits her, or both simultaneously, in the way that the most important things in a person's life tend to be both simultaneously. Consider what Lisa goes through simply as a function of living in Springfield. She is told, repeatedly and through many channels, that her intelligence makes her difficult to be around, that her vegetarianism is a source of family friction, that her commitment to causes nobody else in town cares about marks her as self-righteous, that her sensitivity is something she should learn to moderate. These messages come from everywhere, from her classmates, from the broader Springfield community, from her own father on his less considered days. She absorbs these messages with a resilience that the show depicts as characteristic, but which, if you are paying close attention, costs more over time than it appears to. Each time Lisa is dismissed, each time her insight is ignored, each time she is right about something important, and nobody listens. Something happens to her relationship with the idea that caring deeply about the world is worth the cost of caring. She keeps caring. The show requires it. But there are episodes where the idealism flickers, where you can see what it costs to maintain it in an environment that has never fully supported it. There is the episode where Lisa becomes disillusioned with jazz, her primary emotional and creative sanctuary, when she discovers that the musician she most admires is a fraud. The devastation is not just about the musician, it is about the sanctuary itself, about the possibility that the thing she retreated into when Springfield was too much might have been built on something hollow. There is the episode where Lisa becomes so competitive, so driven by the need to have her intelligence formally validated, to receive the recognition that the rest of her life withholds, that she cheats in a competition. And then she has to sit with what she did, with what it means about who she is becoming under sustained pressure in an environment that does not change. These are not isolated character moments. They are data points in a sustained portrait of someone under pressure that does not relent, navigating a life whose emotional demands exceed what her 8-year-old resources should be required to manage. And here is the detail that connects Lisa to the larger theories the iceberg explores. If the contaminated environment of Springfield produces different effects in different individuals, if the same exposure that has diminished Homer has amplified Maggie, then what has it done to Lisa? Her intelligence is extraordinary, in ways that go beyond what her family background and educational environment would be expected to produce. The show treats it as simply who she is. But the radiation theory asks a harder question. What if the gift is not entirely separable from the place? What if the quality she values most about herself is itself, in some complicated and unintended way, a product of the environment she has been trying to transcend? This is not a question the show asks. But the show's own logic makes the question available, and sitting with it changes the texture of every episode where Lisa struggles with the gap between who she is and where she is. She plays her saxophone in her room. The sound drifts through the house. Nobody hears it the way it deserves to be heard. And she plays on anyway, because it is what she has always done, because the music is hers regardless of whether anyone around her can understand what it means. Number. Section 7. The Real History of Krusty the Clown. Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yeruchim Krustovsky has been making children laugh for a very long time. He is better known as Krusty the Clown, the host of the most popular children's entertainment program in Springfield's history, a figure so deeply embedded in the town's cultural life that Bart Simpson measures significant portions of his emotional landscape by his relationship to and distance from him. Krusty is Bart's hero in the specific way that a certain kind of person becomes a child's hero, not through personal contact or genuine relationship, but through the parasocial intimacy of performance, through the repeated experience of being made to laugh by someone who seems to exist specifically for that purpose. But Krusty's real history, the one that exists underneath the grease paint and the oversized shoes and the career that has been running as long as anyone in Springfield can remember, is a story about a man who has been fleeing from his own life for decades, who has become very good at making other people laugh as a means of never having to be fully seen. Let's start with the father. Rabbi Hyman Krustovsky is one of the show's most interesting supporting characters, a man of genuine moral seriousness and spiritual depth, deeply committed to his faith and his community and his role as a guide to the people who depend on him. He is not a caricature of religious rigidity. He is a man with a coherent worldview and genuine convictions who made a decision that turned out to be the worst decision of his life and who lived with the consequences without fully being able to acknowledge what they had cost. He disowned his son. The disowning happened decades before the show's present timeline. Herschel, as a young man, wanted to become a comedian. He wanted to perform. He wanted to make people laugh, which is a desire that sounds simple until you understand how much it is not. How much the desire to make people laugh is really the desire to have a room full of strangers grant you, repeatedly and freely, the thing that the people in your life sometimes withhold. Rabbi Krustovsky, whose entire value system was organized around tradition and scholarship and the solemn responsibilities of a Jewish man toward his community and his God, saw his son's ambition as a rejection of everything that mattered, a turn away from the serious life towards something frivolous, something embarrassing, something beneath the dignity of the family and the faith. The break was total. Rabbi Krustovsky wrote Herschel out of his life with a thoroughness that the show depicts as genuinely devastating to both parties, though the devastation expresses itself differently in each of them. The rabbi's devastation calcified into righteous certainty the self-protective mechanism of someone who has made a judgment they cannot reverse, and who therefore must believe the judgment was correct. Herschel's devastation became the engine of everything he built afterward. Because here is what Herschel did with the rejection. He became Krusty the Clown. He built a persona that was everything the rabbi's world had no room for: loud, ridiculous, commercial, popular, defined entirely by the approval of strangers. He became successful by the metrics his father's world had no framework for measuring. He got rich, he got famous, he got the audience his father had told him he was not allowed to pursue. And none of it filled the hole the rejection left. This is the most important thing to understand about Krusty. The career was built to answer a dismissal that the career cannot actually answer, because the dismissal was not about the career. It was about whether Herschel Krustovsky was someone whose desires deserved to be taken seriously by the person who mattered most to him. The career cannot answer that question. Only his father could answer it. And his father answered it, for 20 years, with silence. The episode that eventually reconciles them, in which Bart engineers the meeting, in which Herschel and the rabbi are finally in the same room, in which the rabbi is moved by a piece of comedy that makes him genuinely laugh, is one of the show's most emotionally generous achievements. The reconciliation is real, the emotions are real, and the rabbi's realization that his judgment was too harsh, that he lost something irreplaceable by holding the line between serious and frivolous too strictly, that realization is allowed to land with full force. But the episode also shows you, by implication, what the decades of estrangement did to Krusty. They made him someone who can only be comfortable behind a mask. The clown persona is not an affectation he puts on for work and takes off at home. It is the place he retreated to when his father made the person he actually was unacceptable, And the retreat became so total and so long-lasting that after a certain point the distinction between the person and the persona became genuinely difficult to locate. The show has depicted Krusty's private life across dozens of episodes. He performs warmth for the cameras and is genuinely cold off-screen. He performs concern for children on his show and is genuinely indifferent to the actual children in his life, most notably his daughter Sophie, whose existence he was unaware of for years, and whose relationship with him has been depicted as loving but perpetually complicated by his fundamental incapacity to be fully present. He performs sobriety during periods of public scrutiny and drinks heavily when the cameras are off. He performs wealth and success while managing finances that are, behind the scenes, chaotic. There is a specific kind of damage that comes from building your entire adult identity around the performance of a reaction to someone else's rejection of you. It means that your sense of yourself is always, at some fundamental level, dependent on the original wound remaining active. If you resolve the wound, the architecture that was built around it has to be rebuilt around something else. And after decades of the architecture being there, knowing who you would be without it is genuinely difficult. Krusty reconciled with his father. His father died in a later season. The grief was real. And when the grief settled, Krusty was left with the career and the persona and the empire and the question of what comes next for someone in that position. The show, characteristically, did not fully pursue the question. There is also the matter of the merchandise empire. Krusty's face is on an enormous range of products. He has endorsed, licensed, and lent his name and image to things he has not read the specifications of, things he has not personally tested. His name is on restaurants serving food whose ingredients he cannot clearly identify. His name is on a range of products that have generated consumer complaints and minor scandals, none of which have done lasting damage to the brand because the brand is Krusty the Clown, and Krusty the Clown is too embedded in Springfield's cultural DNA to be permanently tarnished. He signs what his management puts in front of him. The restaurants appear, the products appear, the money comes in, and somewhere in the background of all of it, Herschel Krustofsky is wondering whether what he built answers the question the rejection asked, and discovering, again, that it does not, and going on television and making the audience laugh anyway, because that is the one thing he knows how to do that reliably makes him feel like the answer might be yes. Number. Section 8. Sideshow Bob's Impossible Obsession. There is a man who wants to kill a 10-year-old boy. He has been trying to kill this 10-year-old boy for the entire run of the series. He has been imprisoned for it, escaped, recaptured, imprisoned again, escaped again, and through each iteration he has maintained, with the single-minded devotion of someone who has organized their entire existence around a project, the same fundamental goal: Bart Simpson must die. Sideshow Bob Dr. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. Ph.D. is the show's most theatrical antagonist, and, if you spend enough time with the details of his story, one of its most genuinely tragic characters. The theatricality is the first and most important thing to understand about him. Bob is someone who has built an identity around his own sophistication, his education, his cultural refinement, his taste for Gilbert and Sullivan, and his contempt for the degraded popular culture that surrounds him in Springfield. He wears this identity like armor, and the armor keeps people from getting close enough to what is underneath to see it clearly. Bob started as Krusty's sidekick. We have already established the dynamic of that relationship, the humiliation, the exploitation, the disproportion between Bob's actual intelligence and the degraded role the show required him to play. After years of absorbing this treatment, Bob decided to take the show for himself. He framed Krusty for armed robbery. He took over the program. He redesigned it in his own image, cultural, uplifting, educational, and for a brief period he was right. The show was better. The children were better served. Then Bart, who had suspected Krusty's innocence, found the evidence that exonerated Krusty and convicted Bob. Bob went to prison. The show returned to its original format. And Bob lost, in a single day, both his freedom and the only period in his entire life when he had been the author of his own narrative rather than the object of someone else's, when he had converted the years of humiliation into the raw material for something better, and a 10-year-old boy had taken that conversion away from him. The desire to kill Bart is not rational. Bob is fully aware of this. The show has depicted him acknowledging, in various ways, that the obsession has consumed his life in ways he would not have chosen. He has had moments of apparent resolution, moments when the obsession seemed to lift, when his intelligence seemed to redirect towards something that might be worthy of his capabilities. And then something happens. Bart appears. The proximity to achieving his goal ignites the obsession again, with a force that overcomes whatever detachment Bob has managed to build. He cannot maintain the persona of a man who has moved on, because the persona is not true. There is an episode, one of the show's most formally audacious, in which Bob actually succeeds. He kills Bart. The episode plays out the scenario with full commitment, and then reveals that this success was, in Bob's own telling, the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Because without the goal, there was nothing. This is the darkest insight the show has produced about Sideshow Bob, hiding in plain sight across every episode featuring him. The obsession with killing Bart is not really about Bart. It is about having something to organize your life around. It is about the specific relief of knowing what you are for, even if what you are for is terrible. It is about the way that a purpose, any purpose, even a destructive one, provides structure and meaning in a life that might otherwise have to confront the terrifying openness of what it could become without the obsession to fill it. Bob's life before the obsession was a performance of someone else's vision. Krusty's show, Krusty's format. Krusty's requirements applied to Bob's body and Bob's face and Bob's dignity. The obsession gave Bob his own project, his own narrative, his own organizing principle. Removing Bart from the equation did not give Bob his life back. It removed the last structure from a life that had nothing to put in its place, and left him with a void that was considerably more frightening than the pursuit had ever been. He brought Bart back. He needed the pursuit. He needed the antagonist who gave the pursuit its meaning. Because the antagonist is not Bart. The antagonist is the emptiness that would exist without the project, and Bart is what the project is organized around. Consider what the obsession has cost Bob in measurable terms. He has spent significant portions of his adult life in prison. He married Francesca and had a son, Gino, and then drew them both into his obsession with Bart, making them participants in a project that has no future. Gino inherited his father's murderous inclinations toward the Simpson family with an ease that the show plays for comedy, but which is, if you hold it up to the light, genuinely disturbing. A child learning, from birth, that the primary organizing purpose of your family's existence is the destruction of a specific person. The show has given Bob and Bart moments of genuine collaboration episodes, in which their intelligence, turned toward a shared problem, produces something better than either of them could produce alone. These moments are always temporary, but they reveal something the show seems to know even if it cannot develop it fully, that the relationship between Bob and Bart is the most genuinely reciprocal relationship Bob has. It is the only relationship in his life that has required him to be fully present. That has met him as an equal in the specific sense that Bart, despite being 10 years old, is genuinely a worthy opponent, creative, unpredictable, tenacious, impossible to simply outmaneuver. Nobody else in Bob's life has ever engaged with what Bob is capable of seriously enough to actually challenge it. Only Bart sees it. Only Bart takes Sideshow Bob completely seriously. And being genuinely frightening to someone who is paying full attention is the closest thing to being genuinely seen that Bob has experienced since the original wound was delivered. The obsession is terrible. It has cost Bob everything a night of life might have given him, and yet it is also the most alive he has ever been. That is the tragedy of Sideshow Bob. Not that he is evil, but that his most authentic self found its fullest expression in a purpose that should have been beneath him. Number. Section 9. The Flanders Family Underneath the Faith. The house next door to 742 Evergreen Terrace is, by almost every visible measure, a better house. The lawn is better maintained. The paint is fresher. The interior is cleaner and more orderly than the house next door, the house where Homer watches television in a way that suggests the television is winning, where Bart has done something inadvisable to multiple surfaces, where the accumulated entropy of a family that does not prioritize maintenance is visible in every room. The owner of the better house is Ned Flanders, and everything about the exterior presentation of his home and his life and himself is a kind of argument, quiet, persistent, never quite stated directly. Ned does make better choices than Homer in almost every measurable category. He exercises regularly. He does not drink. He attends church with a devotion that reflects genuinely held faith rather than social convention. He maintains his property. He is generous with his time and his resources. He is an attentive and involved father to Rod and Todd, and his life is, by the show's own accounting, considerably harder than Homer's. Ned's wife Maude was killed. This is the fact that sits at the center of everything else about Ned, the irreversible event that divided his life into a before and an after. Maude was killed at a car race when a t-shirt cannon misfired. Misfired because Homer was dodging the t-shirts being shot into the crowd, and the trajectory of his evasion redirected one of them toward Maude, who was knocked from the bleachers. Homer's selfishness killed Maude Flanders. Not deliberately, not maliciously, this is an accident in the purest sense. But the chain of causation is clear, and the show does not attempt to obscure it. Ned forgave Homer. He did this without apparent hesitation, without condition, without using the forgiveness as leverage. He processed his grief and continued to be Homer's neighbor, continued to treat Homer with the same warmth and patience he had always extended, because his faith required it and because he is the kind of person who does what his faith requires, even when what it requires is genuinely difficult. The show has never fully examined what that forgiveness cost. Forgiveness of that magnitude, extended to someone who is not particularly grateful for it, who does not fully understand what he is being forgiven for, who will go on to do inconsiderate things, because that is simply how Homer moves through the world. That forgiveness does not happen without cost to the person extending it. It requires the ongoing suppression of something. It requires the sustained maintenance of a position I have chosen not to be angry at you that runs against what the wounded self would naturally and legitimately choose. We have established the origin of Ned's relentless niceness, the behavioral modification program his parents submitted him to as a child. He was a violent and uncontrollable boy, and his beatnik parents took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through behavioral reprogramming. The niceness is not natural in the way Ned has always assumed it is natural. It is engineered. The aggression was not eliminated. It was suppressed, pressed down beneath a layer of Christian courtesy so thick and so consistently maintained that it has become structural rather than a choice made in the present. Suppressed things do not stay suppressed without ongoing effort. The hurricane episode is the most famous illustration of this. Ned's house is destroyed and the community rebuilds it well-intentioned but incompetent, producing a structure that collapses immediately. And Ned snaps. He has a complete psychological breakdown that is played partially for comedy, but which, if you watch it with full attention, is one of the most honest moments in the show's history. He says things he has been carrying for years. He names the ways people have failed him, the accumulated ledger of unreturned kindnesses and ignored boundaries and one-way generosity. He is angry in the specific way that people are angry when years of suppressed anger finally find a release point. And then he is institutionalized. The breakdown is treated as a medical crisis rather than as a person finally being honest about an unsustainable situation. He is given treatment. He comes out restored to his characteristic niceness. The conditioning is repaired, and the show presents this as resolution. It is not resolution. It is management. And the show knows it on some level even as the episode's structure presents it otherwise. Rod and Todd are the aspects of the Flanders household the show depicts with the most sustained ambivalence, children who are extraordinarily well-behaved, deeply embedded in the religious framework their father has created, gentle and obedient in ways that are genuinely admirable, and also, if you look closely, slightly troubling. They are kind. The kindness is genuine, learned from a father whose kindness, whatever its origins, is also genuine. But they are children who show, in various episodes, an anxiety about the world outside the boundaries of what their faith defines as safe that seems to exceed what ordinary childhood caution would produce. There is an episode where Todd swears one word, heard somewhere, and repeated, and the family's response is outsized in a way that reveals the specific pressure under which the Flanders household operates. Transgression of the household's norms is treated as a moral emergency, producing in the children a relationship with imperfection that is going to cost them something when they encounter the world outside the boundaries their father has drawn. Ned built his life around values that are genuine and maintained them faithfully in conditions that would have broken most people. The faithfulness is genuinely impressive and genuinely admirable, but the faith has not protected him from the things it was supposed to protect him from. The faith did not save Maude. And the faith has not produced in God the reciprocal conversation that it produces in Homer, who talks to God casually and directly and is given responses, while Ned, the devout man, the committed man, The man who has organized his entire existence around his relationship with God has never been shown receiving anything back. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The show has been consistent about this across its entire run, and it is not an oversight. It is a choice. And what the choice says, if you read it honestly, is that in Springfield, goodness and faith and consistent moral effort are not rewarded. What is rewarded, or at least what is animated and given continued stories, is the chaotic, impulsive, often self-destructive energy of a man like Homer, who stumbles through life without moral architecture and somehow keeps arriving at love in the end. Ned has the architecture, and sometimes it feels like the architecture is all he has. The lawn is immaculate, the paint is fresh, the house next door is a mess, and Ned is between the two, patient and cheerful and holding the whole complicated truth of his life behind a smile that costs considerably more than it looks like it costs from the outside. Section 10. Springfield's Lost Citizens Minor Characters with Major Secrets. Springfield is a town full of people the show has barely met. This is one of the most remarkable qualities of a series that has run for over 700 episodes. The accumulation of a population so large and depicted in sufficient detail across enough appearances that the peripheral figures have developed their own gravity. They are there in the background of every crowd scene, standing in line at the Quickie Mart, driving past in cars, occupying the edge of the frame with a specificity that suggests lives extending beyond the edges of the shot. Most of those lives have never been told in full. This section is about some of them. Otto Mann is Springfield Elementary's school bus driver, a fact that should alarm anyone who thinks about it with full attention. He is responsible every weekday morning and afternoon for the safe transport of Springfield's children, performing this responsibility in a state of cheerful, comprehensive impairment that has been a consistent feature of his character across the entire run of the series. The show uses Otto's condition as a personality trait rather than as a problem. He listens to heavy metal. He has long hair and the manner of someone for whom the counterculture of a previous decade has continued uninterrupted into the present. He is warm and generous and genuinely kind to the children in his care. But here is the detail that sits underneath the comedy. Otto Mann is, intermittently, homeless. He has lived in and on the school bus at various points in the show's continuity. His housing situation is unstable in a way the show treats as part of his general alternative lifestyle, without quite registering it as what it actually is, a man who drives children to school every day and whose home is, sometimes, the vehicle in which he does it. Otto's backstory, assembled from the fragments the show has provided, suggests a path that had more in it than where it ended. He was once in a relationship. He had a life with more conventional structure. Whatever happened to move him from that life to this one is not fully depicted, but the shape of it is recognizable. Choices made in one direction rather than another, paths not taken, the specific gravity of certain habits and environments, the gradual narrowing of what seems possible until the school bus and the music and the general state of managed impairment become the entire available world. He is not unhappy. This is genuinely complicated, because his contentment is real. He enjoys his music with a completeness that most people never achieve with anything. He is good at his job in the specific ways that matter. By the metrics he applies to his own life, he is doing fine. But contentment is not the same as okay, and the distinction matters. The contentment is the product of a specific kind of narrowing, the lowering of the threshold of what constitutes a good day to the point where the current circumstances reliably clear it. Otto has made peace with his situation. But the situation itself is not a situation that the peace it has been made with can transform into something it is not. Groundskeeper Willie deserves his own space too, because his story is the most direct statement Springfield Elementary makes about the relationship between essential labor and institutional contempt. Willie came from Scotland. The circumstances of his immigration are less clear, but the shape of the story suggests someone who arrived in the United States with limited options and took what was available, which was a job at an elementary school that nobody else wanted, and has stayed in that job because leaving requires resources that the job systematically prevents you from accumulating. He sleeps in a shack on school property. The shack is not insulated. It is not heated adequately in the kind of winters Springfield appears to have. It is the kind of accommodation that exists at the specific intersection of institutional indifference and labor exploitation. The school needs Willie to be available at all hours, and the shack is what ensures availability while minimizing the cost of providing it. Willie is essential to Springfield Elementary in a way the institution never acknowledges. He makes the place function. Everything that happens inside those walls happens in part because Willie is in his shack, managing the physical infrastructure that makes everything else possible. And the shack is cold in the winter, and he is still there in the morning. That is what devotion looks like when the institution it is directed toward has no idea what devotion is worth. Patty and Selma Bouvier have been working at the Springfield DMV since the beginning of the series, processing licenses and registrations with the specific energy of people who have made peace with the essential purposelessness of their work without allowing that peace to translate into either enthusiasm or resignation. Their personal lives are, by the show's own accounting, lonely in ways that have been persistent features of their adult lives. Selma has been married multiple times to Sideshow Bob, to Troy McClure, to other men across the show's history, with a consistency that points not toward poor judgment, but toward a genuine and sustained desire for companionship that the world has not cooperated with. Meeting durably. Each marriage ends. She returns to the apartment. She lights another cigarette. She watches another MacGyver rerun. She waits. The waiting is the detail. Selma has been waiting for something to change for the entirety of the show's run, and the show's structure ensures that nothing ever changes enough to alter the fundamental condition of the waiting. She gets close. In various episodes, she has moments of genuine connection, and then the episodic reset returns her to the apartment and the cigarettes and the particular quality of a life that is not bad but is also not what she wanted. Patty, revealed in a later season to be gay, has a relationship that the show handles with warmth and genuine care. She falls in love. The relationship is real and significant. And then it ends, as relationships end in Springfield's episodic structure, and she is back in the apartment. The love was real, the ending was real, and the afterward is the apartment and the particular kind of loneliness that exists in the presence of someone who loves you and with whom you are still, in the ways that matter most, alone. They are sharp. They are funny in the specific way that people who have looked at things clearly for a long time are funny, with a dark wit that comes from accepting their situation without pretending to themselves that it is what they would have chosen. Barney Gumble was accepted to Harvard. This is a canonical fact. The show has established a piece of backstory that transforms Barney from a comedy archetype into something considerably more complicated. He was, at some point, someone whose academic performance was extraordinary enough to be recognized by the most selective institution in the country. He had potential of a specific and significant kind. He had a future in front of him that pointed towards something very different from Moe's Barstool. The alcohol changed the trajectory. The show traces this in fragments of backstory involving Homer, involving a first beer at a social event, and then another, and then the trajectory bends and does not straighten. The origin is almost absurdly small given what it produces. That is how it always is. Not a dramatic event, but an accumulation of small decisions whose aggregate effect is only visible in retrospect, when the person looking back is already so far from where they started that the starting point seems like a different person's story. Barney is brilliant in flashes. The show gives you this intermittently and consistently moments when the intelligence that earned the Harvard acceptance surfaces through the fog of decades of damage and produces something unexpected. A film, an insight, a clarity of speech that surprises everyone, including himself. These moments are always brief. The format does not sustain them. He returns to the barstool. The Harvard future sits somewhere in the past, unvisited. And Hans Moleman. We cannot close without Hans Moleman. He is 31 years old. The show has established this through his own testimony, which there is no in-universe reason to disbelieve. He appears to be in his 80s. Something took a young man, a man in the early years of his adult life, and produced whatever Moleman is now. Something aged him catastrophically, reduced him, narrowed him, placed him perpetually in the path of things that kill him, and then ensured that death was not permanent for him, that he would return, unchanged, to be killed again. He has been run over, crushed, buried alive, set on fire, dropped from heights, struck by lightning. He has experienced a variety of deaths that should constitute the final accounting of a life, and he comes back each time as if the accounting were simply an entry in a longer ledger that keeps getting extended. Under the radiation theory, Molman is the most extreme mutation in Springfield, a man whose cellular structure has been so fundamentally altered by environmental contamination that death is not permanent, that his body reconstitutes after fatal trauma, with a resilience that goes beyond Homer's remarkable healing capacity into something qualitatively different. Under the coma theory, he is background noise in Homer's dream, a minor character whose deaths go unregistered by the dreaming mind, because the dreaming mind does not care enough about him to maintain the continuity of his existence between scenes. Under the collective denial theory, his deaths are simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. And under all of these theories, the same question persists. Who was Hans Molman before whatever happened to him? He was 31 once. He was someone's child. He presumably had hopes for his life, ideas about what it would contain, and somewhere between that person and the tiny, near-blind figure who dies at the margins of Springfield's narrative over and over again, something happened. Springfield watches him die and moves on, episode after episode, because that is what Springfield does. It watches, it moves on, it forgets, and in the morning the sun comes up over the cooling towers and Springfield begins again, exactly as it was, with all of its lost citizens still in their places, still waiting for someone to stop and tell the whole story of what happened to them instead of just the parts that are useful for someone else's plot. The whole story is longer and stranger and more affecting than anything the show has ever made room for. But the show has been running for 36 years, and some of that time, if you know where to look, has been quietly making room. Number. Final section. Everything connects the architecture of Springfield. We have spent a long time in Springfield. We have walked its streets, visited its institutions, sat at its bar, attended its school, watched its people navigate the specific circumstances of their lives with varying degrees of grace and varying degrees of awareness about what those circumstances actually are. We have looked at the yellow skin and followed the thread downward. We have examined the power plant and the contaminated water and the cognitive damage and the political structures that keep everything in place. We have looked at what the coma theory says about the emotional core of the show, and what the radiation theory says about the physical reality of the town, and what the principal and the pauper reveals about how collective denial functions as a social technology. And what we have found, at every level we have looked at, is the same thing. Not a simple thing, not a single answer that resolves all the questions, but a pattern. A consistent structural pattern that organizes every detail we have examined, that explains why the same dynamics repeat across different characters and different storylines and different decades of the show's history. The pattern is this. Springfield is a place where the conditions that would allow people to become more than what they already are do not exist, and where the absence of those conditions is maintained so thoroughly that it has stopped looking like an absence and started looking like the nature of things. Homer could have been brilliant. He was brilliant, briefly, when the crayon came out and his IQ rose to genius level, and he saw Springfield clearly for the first time. And he could not bear what he saw. He put the crayon back because the clarity was more painful than the fog. But the choice was rigged before he made it, because the fog was there before the crayon, because the environment had been working on his cognitive capacity since before he was old enough to choose anything. Lisa is brilliant right now, in every episode. And her brilliance is consistently underserved by every institution around her. She keeps trying, because the show requires it, and because it is who she is. But 36 years of episodes also record what sustained effort in unsupportive conditions does to a person. They record the weariness. They record the specific cost of caring, deeply and persistently, in a town that has organized itself around not caring. Apu maintained extraordinary dignity in conditions that most people would not have sustained for a fraction of the time he sustained them, and built a life that is genuinely his own, and paid for it in ways that the show records in fragments distributed across many years. Mo built a bar that became a community and a trap simultaneously, and he is behind the counter, and he will be there tomorrow, and the thing that the bar provides the specific relief of a place that does not require growth, that accepts everyone exactly as they arrive, is also the thing that has kept those men from becoming the people they might have become in different circumstances. Ned built a life around values that are genuine and maintained those values in the face of losses that should have broken them. The world of Springfield has never acknowledged the magnitude of that achievement. His God is silent. His lawn is perfect. Krusty has been performing since the rejection. And the performance has been so total for so long that the question of who is performing and who is real has genuinely blurred, and his father is dead, and he goes on television and makes children laugh. Bob has been pursuing the obsession for the entirety of the show's run, with more of his genuine self invested in it than he has ever invested in anything else. Because the obsession is where his genuine self found its home, and the home is a disaster, and he knows it and cannot leave it. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years, failing the same tests, getting the same phone calls from school, carrying the same weight in the same town that has never understood what it had in him. And Maggie watches all of it, from behind the pacifier, with the enormous eyes and the extraordinary mind and the deliberate silence that is, depending on which theory you are reading through, either the most adaptive response to her environment or the most hopeful projection of an unconscious father's love for the child he cannot protect. Every story in Springfield is a story about potential that was redirected, capacity that was constrained, lives that were shaped systematically and often invisibly by forces that operated at a level above any individual's ability to clearly perceive and therefore resist. The contamination, the cognitive damage, the institutional failures, the economic structure that keeps the money flowing toward one man and away from everything that might challenge his position. Burns is at the organizing center of these forces. Not the only force, not the source of every constraint, but the presence whose motivations explain why the school is underfunded, and the plant keeps running, and Homer keeps working, and the water stays contaminated, and the fish have 3 eyes, and nobody asks why. He does not need to plan it explicitly. He simply needs to own the plant, maintain the monopoly, keep the violations unreported, keep the safety inspector incompetent, keep the school's funding insufficient, keep the population cognitively impaired enough that the questions that would threaten him are never clearly enough formulated to be seriously asked. He has been doing this for 36 years of depicted time and considerably longer by his own biography. And yet the show is not only about this. It is not only a document of exploitation and institutional failure and the systematic squandering of human potential. It is also, simultaneously and with equal conviction, a love story. Homer's love for his family is real. It is one of the most real things in the show. The coma theory, if it is true, makes this love more rather than less significant. A man losing consciousness, losing time, losing the thread of his waking life, organizing every remaining resource of his mind around the image of the people he loves most, preserving them at the moment he knew them best, spending every sleeping moment in their company forever. If that is not love, the word means nothing. Marge's love for Homer, love for a man who is, by any objective assessment, significantly more difficult to love than most available alternatives, is one of the show's most sustained and most quietly extraordinary achievements. She sees him clearly. She knows his limitations with a precision that comes from decades of close observation. And she loves him anyway. Not blindly, not without frustration, but consistently, durably, in a way that has held across every test the show has put it through. Bart loves Lisa with a defensiveness that sometimes looks like antagonism but is not. He protects her the way people protect things they cannot quite admit to caring about. He cannot say he is proud of her in a way that fits who he has decided to be. So he says it sideways, in the moments when the situation is serious enough that his armor drops. Lisa loves Bart with a patience that exceeds what most 8-year-olds should be expected to maintain, and with a genuine appreciation for what he is, for the creativity and the charisma and the specific intelligence that the school has never had a framework for measuring. And through all of it, the family persists. Not perfectly, not without damage, not without the accumulated weight of every unresolved thing pressing against its foundations, but it persists. They sit on the couch together. They eat dinner together. They survive the catastrophes and the resets and the impossible events. The loop holds them together. The loop that the radiation theory says is a biological phenomenon, that the coma theory says is a dream, that the collective denial theory says is a social contract. The loop is also, at its most fundamental level, just what it is. A family, on a couch, in a house on Evergreen Terrace, watching television together on a Sunday night. We press play. The couch gag runs. Homer stumbles through the door. The saxophone plays. Maggie has the star on her head and then she does not. They all converge on the couch from different directions, and they sit down together, and for 22 minutes they are exactly where they are supposed to be. We built the loop by watching. We maintain it by continuing to watch. And every theory we have explored here, every buried story and hidden pattern and structural darkness and accumulated evidence of everything Springfield is, traces back to the same simple origin. We loved this family. We pressed play in 1989 and we could not stop. The iceberg goes very deep. The yellow is just the surface. And at every level beneath it, something is telling us the truth about Springfield, about the systems that shape people without their knowledge or consent, about what it costs to be Ned Flanders or Apu Nahasapi Mapedalon or Sideshow Bob, about what it means to be 10 years old for 36 years and never get to leave the grade you started in. But at the deepest level, underneath all of that, is the couch, and the family, and the feeling persistent and irrational and true that as long as they are there, as long as the credits roll and the music plays and Bart is still 10, and Lisa is still 8, and Maggie is still watching with those enormous eyes, something we need is being preserved. We are not watching Springfield because it is happy. We are watching it because it is ours. And because in the version of Springfield that exists inside the loop, the one where Homer always finds his way home, and Marge is always there when he does, and the kids are always young, and the evening is always beginning, something that we already know is temporary is being held, carefully, against the natural force of time. The lights are on at the Quickie Mart. The bar is open. The school will start again in the morning. The cooling towers are still cracking. And somewhere in a house on Evergreen Terrace, a family is watching television together, yellow-skinned and four-fingered and impossible and completely real. The loop holds. It always holds. And we would not have it any other way. Number. Section 2 continued. The weight of the Quickie Mart. The Quickie Mart is a franchise operation. Apu does not own the store independently. He manages it on behalf of a parent corporation headquartered in India, run by a figure the show refers to as the CEO or the squishy master, who is depicted as monumentally indifferent to the conditions his franchise operators face. The corporation wants the store to be open and the shelves to be stocked and the customer satisfaction scores to meet the minimum threshold, and beyond those requirements, what happens to the person managing the store is not something the corporation has organized itself to care about. This structure deserves attention because it is not incidental to Apu's situation, it is foundational to it. A franchise operator is not an employee in the traditional sense, which means he has fewer of the protections that employment law provides. He is not an independent business owner in the meaningful sense either, because the brand, the supply chain, the operating procedures, and the ultimate decision-making authority belong to someone else entirely, someone who is very far away, and whose contact with the actual conditions inside any individual Quickie Mart is essentially zero. Apu occupies a position that has been specifically designed by the franchise model to concentrate responsibility without power. He is responsible for everything that happens inside that store. He is accountable for the outcomes. He absorbs the consequences of problems he did not create, with equipment he did not choose, serving products whose quality he did not control, under a brand he does not own. And the margins of a convenience store, the actual profit available to the person running one, are thin enough that the financial reward for all of this responsibility is modest in ways that bear no relationship to the total effort expended. He has been running the store for decades. He was running it before he was a citizen. He will presumably keep running it because the alternative, selling the franchise, taking the liquidated equity, and doing something else requires a kind of financial cushion and risk tolerance that decades of thin margins and enormous expenses have made very difficult to accumulate. The store is in a constant state of disrepair. The hot dogs have been rotating on the rollers since a date the show implies predates most of the customers' memories. The show has made this a recurring gag, the hot dogs of unknown vintage, the rotating machinery that has achieved a kind of geological permanence. But the joke points towards something that is not really funny when you hold it up clearly. The hot dogs are there because replacing inventory that is not moving costs money that the margins do not easily accommodate. They are there because a franchise model does not incentivize the individual operator to discard product when the corporation is not absorbing the loss. They are there because Apu has learned, through necessity, to maintain the appearance of a fully stocked store through strategies that a better-funded operation would not need to employ. The squishy machine breaks regularly. The walk-in cooler makes sounds that suggest internal negotiations between aging machinery and the demands placed on it. The convenience store, which from the outside presents the bright, reliable face of a franchise in good standing, is held together through Apu's ingenuity and willingness to personally absorb problems that a better resourced operation would have a maintenance team for. And the customers are not always kind. Apu serves a customer base that includes some of the most demanding and least considerate personalities in Springfield, people who arrive at 2 in the morning with complex requests, who question the freshness of products without understanding what it would cost to replace them, who take the availability of the quick e-mart so completely for granted that they have never spent a single moment of their lives considering what it would mean if Apu were not there. There is an episode in which Apu reveals how much he knows about each of his regular customers, their habits, their preferences, their moods, the subtle signals that tell him how to manage any given interaction most efficiently. The knowledge is detailed and the memory that holds it is extraordinary. He has been paying attention with a precision that his customers have never applied to him in return. He knows them. They do not know him. They never thought to. This asymmetry is not something the show dwells on, but it is there across every episode that features the Quick E-Mart. Apu provides the thing people need and makes the transaction pleasant and never requires anything of them in return, and they leave and come back and leave again, and he stays, behind the counter, under the fluorescent lights, in a shop that does not close. Then there is the matter of Apu's inner life, the interior landscape that the show has depicted in fragments when the comedy makes room for it. He is a man of genuine cultural depth. He came from a place with its own traditions, its own spiritual architecture, its own relationship to time and meaning and community that has no direct equivalent in Springfield's social landscape. He is a practicing Hindu in a town that is almost entirely shaped by its Christian heritage, where the Flanders family next door to the Simpsons represents the dominant cultural force. His faith is genuine, and it sustains him, but it also marks him as different in a community that does not easily accommodate difference. He adapted. That is the most accurate single description of what Apu Nahasapi Mapetalan has done with his life in Springfield. He adapted, continuously and completely, to the requirements of the environment around him. He learned the idioms, he learned the cultural references, he learned how to be useful and pleasant and unobtrusive in a community that was not built with him in mind. He learned how to make Springfield feel like home, not because it was home in the way that home is home, but because he was going to be there regardless, and making it feel like home was the most sensible, available option. What he did not adapt away from what he maintained through every accommodation was the inner life, the curiosity, the intelligence, the values, the faith, the sense of himself as a person of depth and substance. These remained. And this is the most important thing about Apu. Not the tragedy of his circumstances, though those circumstances are genuinely difficult. Not the injustice of his situation, though the injustice is real. But the fact that through all of it, through 20 years of legal precarity and the franchise model and the thin margins and the customers who do not know him, he remained himself. Fully, consistently, with a dignity that the comedy format of the show can sometimes obscure but has never actually erased. He is still there. He will be there tomorrow. The lights are on at the Quick E-Mart, and Apu is behind the counter, and somewhere inside the routine, somewhere beneath the management of an impossible schedule, the man who earned a PhD and speaks 4 languages and holds a black belt is still present, fully present, waiting for a world that might one day have the capacity to see him completely. Springfield has never quite managed it, but the story is not over. It just has not been told in full. Number, Section 3 continued. The education Bart never received. There is a question the show poses without ever quite asking it directly. And the question is this: what would Bart Simpson look like if the world around him had been organized to actually see what he was? Not to manage him, not to contain him, not to process him through a disciplinary system designed to minimize the disruption he caused to everything around him, but to genuinely look at what Bart brought to every room he entered and ask, what do we do with this? How do we take this and build something from it rather than simply trying to prevent it from breaking things? The show has imagined versions of this. There are episodes where Bart, placed in a context that can actually accommodate him, demonstrates something that defies the categorization the rest of his life has placed on him. He is a natural performer. He can read an audience with a precision that most trained performers spend years developing. He can improvise under pressure. He can take a situation that is falling apart and redirect it with an instinctive grasp of what the moment needs. That is, genuinely, a form of intelligence. Not the intelligence the standardized test measures. Not the intelligence the school's academic framework is designed to recognize and reward. A different kind. A real one. The show gave Bart a brief period as a child actor and handled it with characteristic ambivalence. The success was real, the recognition was real, and it was taken away. The show gave him a period of managing a small enterprise with surprising competence. It gave him moments of genuine leadership, moments when his capacity to organize other people around a shared goal produced outcomes that nobody expected from a kid who had been written off as a troublemaker before he was old enough to know what either word meant. These moments are always temporary in the show. The format requires the reset, but they accumulate into a portrait of someone who has never had the sustained engagement with the right kind of challenge that would allow whatever he is to fully develop into whatever it could become. Consider the specific nature of how Bart fails academically. His difficulties are not distributed evenly across subjects. He does not fail everything uniformly. He struggles most with tasks that require sustained independent engagement with material in a format that provides no immediate feedback, no social element, no dynamic quality. He struggles with sitting still and reading a chapter and answering questions that feel disconnected from anything that matters. He struggles with the passive reception of information that is being transmitted in one direction without any of the responsiveness that makes information feel real. He does not struggle with learning when the learning involves doing something, when the learning is embedded in a situation rather than abstracted from it, when the information is connected to an outcome he cares about, when he can see in real time what his engagement with a problem is producing. These are not character flaws. They are descriptions of how a particular kind of mind engages with the world. The literature on this is extensive and has been available to educators for decades. A different school, with different resources and a different framework, could look at Bart Simpson's profile and recognize it, could design an approach to his education that meets him where his mind actually operates, rather than where the institutional structure finds it convenient for his mind to operate. Springfield Elementary is not that school. It has never been that school. And the argument this iceberg makes is that its failure to be that school is not entirely accidental. A student who develops his full capacities, who learns to think clearly, to build things, to lead effectively, to engage with complex problems, is a student who grows into an adult with the cognitive and social resources to notice the architecture of the town he lives in, to ask why the water is contaminated, to ask who benefits from the school being underfunded, to ask what the relationship is between the man who owns the plant and the decisions made about the school that serves his workforce's children. Bart's failure is Springfield's success. Not the success of any individual who planned it, necessarily, but the success of a system whose outcomes reliably favor the people who are already powerful by producing, decade after decade, a generation of adults who never quite developed the tools they would need to challenge that power. Homer was once brilliant. The crayon is not the only evidence of this. The show has documented, across dozens of episodes, a person whose intuitions are occasionally extraordinary, whose understanding of human nature, whose grasp of social dynamics, whose capacity for emotional insight produces, in the right circumstances, something that looks nothing like the character the show usually presents. Homer's stupidity is real, documented, consistent, but it coexists with something else that the stupidity covers, that only surfaces when the situation is exactly right, and that disappears again when the moment passes. If Bart is Homer's son in more than just the literal sense, then the potential that was buried in Homer was presumably present in Bart before it was buried in Bart. The burying happens at Springfield Elementary. The burying has been happening at Springfield Elementary for as long as there have been children to bury. The crayon in Homer's brain did not install itself. Someone put it there, or someone failed to remove it, and the failure was total enough that it went undetected through years of medical checkups in a town where the medical establishment is, as the contamination theory would predict, compromised in its ability to deliver honest assessments of what it is seeing. This is the conspiracy at the heart of Bart's story, not a conspiracy that requires anyone to have explicitly planned his educational failure. A conspiracy that requires only that the same forces operating on every other system in Springfield be operating on the school too. Under-resourced institutions that cannot see the students who need different approaches. Adults who have been so thoroughly shaped by the town's cognitive environment that they cannot imagine doing things differently than they have always been done. A principal whose identity is built on a fiction and whose psychological resources are consumed by maintaining that fiction rather than improving the institution he nominally leads. And Bart, sitting in the back row of Mrs. Krabappel's classroom, with a slingshot in his pocket and a 10-year-old's certainty that nobody in this building is going to help him, Bart, whose instincts about his situation are almost perfectly accurate, even if the framework to articulate them is not available to him. Bart is doing the only thing available to someone in his position. He is keeping himself interested. He is generating his own stimulation in a context that provides none. He is finding the edges of every situation because the edges are the only place where anything real ever seems to happen. He is being, with everything he has, the only version of himself the world has ever given him room to be. He is 10 years old. He will be 10 years old tomorrow. And the classroom will be there, and Mrs. Krabappel will be there, and the test will be there, and Bart will be in the back row. The question that Springfield has never been organized to ask is what would happen if someone sat down next to him and genuinely tried to find out. Section 4, continued. What Skinner actually knows. There is a man running Springfield Elementary who knows exactly what the school is and has known it for a very long time. The thing about Armin Tamzarian, the man who became Seymour Skinner, is that his fraudulence did not start with the identity theft. The fraudulence started before that, in the life he lived before he arrived in Springfield, in the specific kind of person he was before the Army and Vietnam, and the disappearance of the real Skinner gave him a new name to wear. Tamzarian was a street kid. He grew up outside the systems, outside the educational systems, outside the economic systems, outside the social systems that organize legitimate middle-class American life into a predictable sequence of milestones and achievements. He was not prepared by any of the normal preparation mechanisms to lead an educational institution. He arrived at the role through a combination of guilt and opportunity and a mother's desperate need. And he learned the role the way people learn things when they have no formal training. By watching, by imitating, by developing a working knowledge of the surface behaviors that constitute the performance of competence, and by hoping that the performance is detailed enough to pass for the real thing. He has been performing for 20 years. He has performed the role of the principal who takes his responsibilities seriously, who maintains appropriate authority, who ensures that the institution continues to function. And the institution does continue to function, in the sense that the building opens every morning, and the students arrive, and the teachers teach, and the bells ring, and everyone goes home in the afternoon. But there is a difference between an institution that functions and an institution that serves its purpose. Springfield Elementary functions. It does not, by any rigorous assessment, serve its purpose. It does not produce the educational outcomes that a school with its resources, such as they are, should produce. It does not develop the full capacities of the students in its care. It does not attract and retain the quality of teaching staff that the students deserve. It does not advocate effectively for the funding it needs, because effective advocacy requires a principal who is secure enough in his position to make enemies. And Tamzarian has never been secure in his position. He has been afraid of discovery for 20 years. That fear is the most consistent element of his psychology across every episode featuring him. He is a man who has built everything on a foundation that can be demolished by a single piece of information landing in the wrong hands. His authority, such as it is, his position in the community, his relationship with his mother, his entire social existence in Springfield, everything depends on nobody ever finding out. This fear shapes how he leads. A principal who is secure in his position can afford to make difficult decisions, can afford to challenge the status quo, can afford to advocate loudly for things that are genuinely needed and risk the conflict that comes from that advocacy. A principal who is terrified of being exposed cannot afford any of these things. Every decision must be calibrated to minimize attention, to avoid the kind of scrutiny that might lead someone to look too closely, to confirm the official narrative rather than question it. The school's underperformance is, in this reading, partly a function of Tamzarian's specific psychology. He cannot push hard enough for what the school needs because pushing hard attracts attention, and attention is what he cannot risk. The school drifts because its leader is a man who has organized his entire existence around not being seen clearly. There are moments in the show where something else surfaces in Skinner, where you can see the street kid underneath the principal's uniform, making a decision that the principal's framework would not produce. Moments of genuine strategic intelligence, of creative problem-solving, of a kind of resourcefulness that formal training never quite produces, but that difficulty definitely does. These moments suggest that Tamzarian has capabilities that the Skinner role never fully uses, that there is a competence inside the performance that the performance actively constrains. He was given the identity of a decorated war hero. He wore it for 20 years. And the town chose to let him keep it, even after the truth was revealed, because the truth was less useful than the lie. Springfield Elementary has a principal who is not who he says he is, whose legitimate capabilities are suppressed by the fear of discovery, who runs an institution whose underperformance is partially a function of his own compromised position, and who has known all of this with full clarity since the day he arrived. Springfield chose this. Springfield voted for this. Springfield made it illegal to acknowledge anything different. And in the morning, Skinner straightens his jacket and walks through the front door, and the school day begins. And everything is exactly as it has always been, and the students take their seats, and nobody mentions what everyone has agreed not to mention. That is Springfield Elementary's most important lesson. It is not in the curriculum, but it is the one that sticks. Number. Section 5 continued. The men at Moe's Bar. There is a specific kind of loneliness that does not look like loneliness from the outside. It has warmth. It has humor. It has the particular ease of people who have been in the same room together so many times that the interaction has become frictionless, where nobody has to perform and nobody has to explain context, and the shorthand of years of shared experience allows entire conversations to be conducted in references that would be opaque to any newcomer. This is what Moe's Tavern looks like from the inside. From the inside, it looks like community. And it is community, in the technical sense. These men are genuinely connected. The bond is real. The care is real, expressed in the specific way that men who do not articulate their feelings articulate them through showing up, through staying, through the reliable presence that says, I am here, even if it never says I love you in so many words. But the community they have built is a community organized around staying still, around the shared agreement that growth is not on the agenda, around the mutual support not for becoming more, but for continuing to be exactly what each of them already is, which is, in every case, someone who showed up at this bar with a wound and has been managing the wound ever since through the specific medication that the bar provides. Homer's wound is the complicated relationship with his father, the absence of his mother, the cognitive damage that prevents him from seeing his own situation clearly enough to change it, and the deep, persistent terror that the love he has the family on Evergreen Terrace, the couch, the television, the specific warmth of coming home is more fragile than he can allow himself to consciously examine. The bar is where you go when the fragility of the thing you love gets too close to the surface. The bar puts distance between you and the feeling without requiring you to address the feeling. The feeling is still there when you leave. The bar just gave you a few hours of not having to look at it directly. Lenny and Carl are worth their own attention here, because their friendship, which has run parallel to Homer's life for the entire duration of the show, is one of the most genuinely intimate male friendships in the history of American television. And it is intimate in a way the show has always handled with more care than it sometimes receives credit for. Lenny and Carl are inseparable in a way that the show has flagged, over the years, with a knowing nudge that never quite becomes explicit. They finish each other's thoughts. They show up to the same events. They are at Moe's at the same time every night, and at work at the same time every morning, and at every Springfield event together with the reliability of two people for whom the natural state is shared space. The show has made jokes about the nature of their closeness without ever fully naming what the closeness might be. What the closeness is in terms of its emotional function is the most honest relationship either of them has. Whatever they are to each other, and the show has been deliberately opaque about the full truth of it, they are more completely themselves together than they are anywhere else. They provide each other with a consistency that is not available from any other source in either of their lives. They also both work at the nuclear plant. They have worked there for the entirety of the show's run, alongside Homer, in the same facility with the same 342 safety violations that nobody has fixed. They have been there through every accident, every near miss, every moment when the safety of the entire town depended on the competence of Homer Simpson and the structural integrity of cracked cooling towers. They have absorbed the same environmental exposure. They live in the same contaminated town, and they sit at the same bar stools, every evening, with the same flat beer, processing none of this and everything that goes along with it. The bar is what keeps Springfield running in a specific and underappreciated way. Without Moe's, the pressure that the contaminated environment and the compromised institutions and the economic exploitation generates in the people who live under those conditions would need somewhere else to go. And pressure that has nowhere to go either explodes outward or collapses inward, both of which produce consequences that are harder for the existing power structure to manage than a population that disperses its frustration at the bar every evening and comes back to work in the morning. The bar is, in this reading, a kind of civic function, not one that anyone designed explicitly, but one that serves the existing order with reliable efficiency nonetheless. It takes men who might otherwise develop the persistent, organized dissatisfaction that leads to organized challenges to the way things are, and it gives that dissatisfaction somewhere comfortable to go where it can run out the clock without ever quite becoming anything more. Burns does not own Moe's. He does not need to. The bar does the work regardless. Number. Section 6 continued. The cost of being right. Lisa Simpson has been right about almost everything. This is not an exaggeration for effect. Across the run of the series, across hundreds of episodes and dozens of major storylines, Lisa has correctly identified the problem, correctly analyzed the cause, correctly proposed the solution, and then watched the solution be ignored, misunderstood, rejected, or implemented too late and in the wrong way. She has been right about the environmental damage the plant causes. She has been right about the nutritional content of the food Springfield's children are eating. She has been right about political corruption, about historical revisionism, about economic inequality, about cultural exploitation. She has been right with the specificity and the clarity that only comes from someone who has done the work of actually understanding the thing she is talking about. And it has not helped. Not in any sustained way. Not in the way that being right is supposed to help. In the way that the cultural narrative of intelligence and effort tells you being right will help, eventually, if you keep at it long enough. The show has been honest about this in ways that make it one of the more genuinely bleak elements of the series, hiding in plain sight behind Lisa's relentless optimism. The optimism is real. It is a core part of who she is, and the show has never reduced her to pure cynicism. But the optimism coexists with an accumulating evidence base that, if examined clearly, does not support it. The evidence base says, the problems persist. The solutions are not implemented. The people who need to change do not change. And the effort of continuing to care, to try, to advocate, to believe that this time will be different, that effort extracts a cost that the optimism has to keep outpacing. There are episodes where the cost surfaces, where you can see what sustained effort in a resistant environment does to someone who cares as much as Lisa does. There is a weary edge to certain moments. A quality of having had to find the same argument for the same problem too many times in a row. A look that passes across her face when she is about to explain something that should not need explaining again. She is 8 years old. She has always been 8 years old. And she has been paying the cost of being right in a world that is not organized to listen for the entirety of that time. The specific damage this does is worth naming carefully. Being consistently right without being consistently heard does something very particular to a person's sense of what their capabilities are worth. The capabilities are real. The correctness is real. The analysis is good, but the outcome, the actual change in the world that the analysis was supposed to produce, does not materialize. And over time, the gap between the capability and the outcome starts to feel like a statement about the value of the capability itself. This is what happens to intelligent people in environments that cannot metabolize their intelligence. The intelligence does not go away. It continues to function, continues to produce insights, continues to generate the analysis that should be useful. But its relationship to the world around it breaks down. It stops being a tool that changes things and becomes instead a private experience, something that happens inside you, accurately describing a world that the world itself refuses to match. Lisa has not reached this point. The show has not allowed her to reach it. But the show has shown you the edge of it. In the episodes where her certainty wavers, where she begins to wonder whether the effort is proportionate to the outcome, where she briefly permits herself the question she never quite allows herself to finish. What if it doesn't matter? She always pulls back from that question. She returns to the saxophone, or to the book, or to the next cause, and the optimism reasserts itself. This is who she is. But the question has been there. The show put it there. And it is not a comfortable question to sit with in the context of an 8-year-old who has been fighting the same fights for 36 years. The flash-forward episodes, the ones that show Lisa's future, are interesting in this light because they show you what the sustained effort produces. They show a young woman who has found, eventually, a context that can accommodate her, a university that can challenge her, a field that values what she brings, a life that has more room for her than Springfield ever did. And they also show you consistently, across every version of the future the show has imagined, that the leaving was not clean, that Springfield came with her, that the family, which is the source of both the deepest love and the most persistent frustration in her life, did not stop being the family just because she moved to a place that was better for her. She carries Springfield the way everyone carries the place they came from. Not as a comfortable weight, but as the specific shape of the container that formed her, which means she does not fit comfortably into other containers, which means the places that are better for her in some ways are also, in other ways, places where she is always slightly the wrong shape for the space. The show has never resolved this. It returns her to Springfield, to being 8, to the same house and the same couch and the same family. It does this because the format requires it, but also because the return is true in a way that goes beyond format. You do not leave Springfield. You carry it with you into whatever comes next. Lisa knows this. She has always known this. It is, among all the things she has been right about, the thing it is hardest to be right about. Number, Section 7 continued. The machine behind the laughter. Krusty the Clown's face is on a vast number of things. This fact alone, examined without the context of who Krusty is and how the empire came to exist, would be unremarkable. Licensing is how entertainment brands expand. The face of a popular character goes on merchandise and restaurant signage and branded products, and the revenue from those associations funds the production of more content, which makes the face more recognizable, which licenses more merchandise. This is the ordinary mechanism of entertainment commerce, and there is nothing sinister about the mechanism itself. What is worth examining is how the mechanism operates in Krusty's specific case. Because Krusty is not a figure who built his brand through the kind of sustained, attentive engagement with his public persona that most successful entertainment brands require. He is a figure who became famous in a specific market, Springfield's children, and then extended his name into products and services that he has not examined, supervised, or in some cases, ever personally encountered. The Krusty Burger chain exists. The food it serves has been depicted in the show with a candor about its nutritional content that is alarming if you take it seriously, rather than reading it as satirical exaggeration. The products that carry his face and name have included items that prompted consumer complaints and regulatory inquiries, none of which produced lasting damage to the brand, because the brand is Krusty. And Krusty is what Springfield's children watched every afternoon, and the association is so deep and so early in their memories that it functions as something closer to a cultural reflex than a considered commercial relationship. He signs what his management puts in front of him. This is the most accurate characterization of how Krusty has operated his commercial empire. Not through strategic decision-making, not through careful evaluation of which partnerships serve his audience's interests, but through the accumulated momentum of a machine that has been running for long enough that it largely runs itself, requiring only his signature and his continued willingness to appear on camera and be Krusty in public. His personal manager, who has been handling his affairs for years, has interests that do not always align with Krusty's. This is not an accusation, it is simply the structural reality of a management relationship when the managed party has ceded sufficient control. The manager makes decisions. Krusty approves them at the level of awareness that his general orientation toward signing things produces. The machine continues. What the machine has not produced, what no amount of licensing revenue and franchise expansion has produced, is a Krusty who feels settled. Who feels that the thing he built actually answered the question he was building it to answer. The question, as established, was his father's judgment, which found the career unworthy before it began. The career became enormously successful by every external metric, and the father's judgment, before it was explicitly withdrawn, remained unchanged in Krusty's experience of it because the external metrics are not actually what the judgment was about. There is a version of Krusty's life in which the reconciliation with his father, which was genuine, which produced a real shift in their relationship, before the rabbi's death could have become the foundation for something different. For a period in which Krusty's engagement with his work was organized around something other than the wound was addressed. The specific thing the career had been answering was answered, more directly and more honestly than the career ever could have answered it. The rabbi said, "I was wrong." The judge Elihu said, "This is funny." The laughter was given back. And Krusty went back to the show and signed the next thing his management put in front of him, and the machine kept running. This is not a tragedy in the sense of a conclusion. It is a tragedy in the sense of a continuation, the specific horror of having the thing you needed, and then discovering that having it did not fundamentally reorganize the life that was built around not having it. The life that was built around the wound is still the life. The wound is healed, but the architecture remains. There is also the matter of Krusty's relationship with his audience. He has been performing for children for the entirety of his career. Children who have grown up and become adults and perhaps had children of their own who now watch the show. Generations of Springfield's children have organized a significant portion of their early emotional life around the experience of being made to laugh by Krusty the Clown. Bart's devotion to Krusty is the clearest example of this. Bart idolizes him in the specific way that a certain kind of child idolizes a certain kind of performer, not because the performer represents values he aspires to, but because the performer represents the specific quality of his own interior world being recognized and reflected back at him. When Krusty makes a joke, something in Bart feels understood. When Krusty is irreverent and anarchic and refuses to take the serious things seriously, it validates Bart's own instinct toward irreverence and anarchy. Krusty tells Bart, without ever directly saying it, that the way Bart moves through the world is okay, is maybe even great. This is a significant thing to give a 10-year-old who is consistently being told by every official institution around him that the way he moves through the world is a problem. Krusty does not know he is giving this. He is not thinking about Bart when he goes on camera. He is managing his anxiety, performing his persona, getting through the next segment. But the gift lands regardless. Because that is how parasocial relationships work, the intention is irrelevant. The effect is determined by what the audience brings to the encounter and what they find there. What Bart finds in Krusty is permission, the specific permission to be the way he is. And this is the most quietly profound thing the machine has produced. Not the franchise restaurants or the licensed merchandise or the empire built to answer a father's rejection, but the ongoing, unintentional, enormously important gift of a 10-year-old boy who feels, because of a clown on television, slightly less alone in the specific way he is. This is what fame does when it is real. Not what it was supposed to do, what it actually does. In the lives of the people watching, Krusty will never know. The machine does not provide him with that kind of feedback. He signs the next thing, and the show goes on. Number. Section 8 continued. What sideshow Bob was built for. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. has a doctorate. The show has mentioned this consistently across his appearances, and the detail deserves more attention than it typically receives. He earned a PhD. He completed a program of graduate study in a field that required sustained intellectual engagement at a level that very few people achieve. He is, by any conventional measure of academic achievement, one of the most educated characters in the show's history. He then took a job as the silent sidekick to a children's television clown. He wore enormous shoes and a colored wig and did pratfalls on camera for an audience of the very young. And he did this for years because the job was available, and the alternative, whatever the alternative would have been for someone with his educational background and his specific personality and his particular relationship to the world, was not available in any clear way. This is the biographical detail that makes everything else about Sideshow Bob comprehensible, not the violence, which is the detail the show foregrounds. Not the obsession, which is the detail the show returns to most often, but the gap, the enormous, structurally produced gap between what his training pointed toward and where he ended up. Someone with a PhD does not become a television sidekick because that is the natural conclusion of the trajectory. They become a television sidekick because the trajectory met an obstacle, or a series of obstacles, that redirected it somewhere the trajectory was not pointed. The obstacles in Bob's case are not fully specified by the show, but the shape of them can be inferred. His personality, which is specific and demanding and organized around a set of aesthetic and intellectual standards that most people find exhausting, makes him difficult to accommodate in most conventional professional contexts. His contempt for what he regards as inferior work or inferior culture is not something he is able to conceal effectively. He is the kind of person who makes the people around him feel evaluated and often found wanting, and people who feel evaluated and often found wanting tend to exclude the evaluator from the opportunities that depend on their cooperation. So he took the job on the show, and he was good at it, in the technical sense. He performed his function reliably and without obvious complaint. He did what the role required. And every day that he wore the wig and did the pratfall, something in him was accumulating. Not bitterness exactly. Bitterness is too simple for what was building in Bob. Something more complex. A sustained recognition of the distance between the life and what the life could have been, combined with a sustained inability to find any mechanism for closing that distance. When he finally moved, when he framed Krusty and took the show, what he produced was, by any honest assessment, better. The children were better served. The content was more worthwhile. The approach was more intelligent and more genuinely educational. He was right about all of this. He made an improvement, through criminal means, to something that was capable of improvement. And then a 10-year-old boy saw through it. Not through sophisticated analysis or adult investigation. Bart saw through it because he was paying the right kind of attention at the right moment. And the right kind of attention for Bart is the attention he brings to things he cares about, which is acute and intuitive and surprisingly difficult to fool. Bart cared about Krusty. That care led to attention. That attention led to the observation that cracked the fraud. And Bob, who had spent years building a life around intellectual superiority as a shield against the wound of the wasted potential, was undone by a child whose academic record could not have been more different from his own. This is the detail that makes the obsession psychologically intelligible. It is not that Bart humiliated Bob. It is that Bart saw through him. That the thing Bob uses to maintain his sense of himself, the intelligence, the education, the sophisticated contempt for lesser minds, turned out to be insufficient to conceal the fraud from someone operating entirely outside of intellectual frameworks. Bart did not outsmart Bob. He simply noticed something. And the noticing destroyed everything. The obsession is the attempt to undo that fact. The pursuit of Bart is the pursuit of a world in which Bob's intelligence is sufficient, in which the sophisticated mind always has the advantage over the intuitive one, in which the decade of education means what it is supposed to mean. Every attempt to kill Bart is an attempt to reestablish the order that Bart's perception disrupted. It never works. It never will. Because the order that Bob is trying to reestablish never actually existed in the form he remembers it. His intelligence was always going to be insufficient for certain kinds of perception. The doctorate was always going to be outmaneuvered by the right kind of noticing. The elaborate plan was always going to be vulnerable to the simple observation made at the right moment. He knows this, at some level, and cannot fully face it, and so the pursuit continues. Because the pursuit is the alternative to facing it. The pursuit keeps the question open, and as long as the question is open, Bob does not have to sit with the answer. Section 9 continued. The Flanders Hypothesis. Here is the question that the show has never formally posed, but that the accumulation of its evidence makes inevitable. If Ned Flanders had been born next door to a different family, what would his life have looked like? Remove Homer from the equation? Remove the specific quality of the relationship that has defined Ned's adult life more completely than any other single factor. Remove the daily exercise and tolerance, and the ongoing requirement to extend grace to someone who has caused Ned genuine harm. Remove the particular pressure of having a neighbor who represents, in almost every visible dimension, the inverse of everything Ned has built his life around, and who nevertheless gets more divine attention and more casual happiness than Ned manages to produce through sustained effort and genuine faith. Remove all of that, and what do you have? The show does not know. The show has never tried to find out, because the contrast between Ned and Homer is one of the load-bearing structural elements of the series. It cannot be removed without changing the architecture of everything around it. But the question is worth sitting with for a moment, because it illuminates something about Ned that the constant comparison obscures. Ned Flanders is a genuinely unusual human being. Not in the way that the word unusual is sometimes used as a softened version of strange but unusual in the statistical sense. The consistency of his values, the depth of his faith, the quality of his relationships with his sons, the generosity with which he approaches virtually everyone he encounters, these are not common characteristics. They are characteristics that require sustained cultivation to develop and sustained effort to maintain. He has maintained them in conditions that are, to use the technical term, adverse. The loss of Maud, The ongoing relationship with Homer. The discovery that his niceness is partly engineered rather than entirely chosen. The silence of a God to whom he speaks with complete regularity and genuine openness. These are not small things. They are the kind of things that change people, that erode the qualities they were built around, that make even very committed people wonder whether what they believe is actually true. Ned has not been eroded. He has been damaged. The breakdown after the hurricane showed that clearly. But the damage did not corrupt what was underneath it. He rebuilt. He continued. He kept the faith in the specific sense of keeping the practice, which is the only sense in which keeping faith can be meaningfully measured, because the feeling of faith is not always available, and what you do in the absence of the feeling is what actually defines the relationship. The most interesting thing the show has done with Ned in recent seasons is to give him romantic relationships after Maud's death. These relationships matter for what they reveal. In each of them, Ned encounters women who see him clearly, who understand what he is offering, who appreciate the specific quality of his character and who are, for various reasons, not permanently available to him. The relationships are real, the connections are genuine, and they do not last, because the show's structure requires Ned to remain the neighbor, the widower, the man across the fence. But in each of them, something is visible that the comparison with Homer tends to obscure. Ned is someone a person would want, not in the performance of values but in the practice of them. Someone who shows up, who is honest, who is capable of genuine vulnerability, who has navigated enormous loss without becoming someone incapable of love. The show has never fully given him what he deserves. The format does not allow it, but the depiction of what he deserves, of the genuine quality of what Ned Flanders has built through faith and effort and sustained grace toward people who do not always merit, it has been there across 36 years of episodes, visible to anyone willing to look past the contrast with Homer and see what is actually standing next door. God talks to Homer. God is silent with Ned. The show puts this there and does not explain it. Because some things are not explained not by the show and not by the world the show is mapping. Some things are simply the texture of a life, present without justification, persisting without resolution. Ned wakes up every morning. He straightens his sweater, he walks out the front door, and he tries again, because that is what he does, because that is who he is, because the silence has never been sufficient reason to stop speaking. That is either the greatest spiritual achievement in Springfield's history or the most complete expression of its most fundamental absurdity. Maybe those are the same thing. Number section 10 continued. Springfield's invisible people. There is a version of Springfield that never appears on screen. It is the version inhabited by the people who are present in every crowd scene, who populate the background of every public event, who stand in lines and fill auditoriums and drive past in the background. These are the people whose stories the show has never told, not because they have no stories, but because the format can only follow so many threads at once, and the threads it follows belong to the characters whose names appear in the credits. The untold stories are not absent. They are implied by the details that accumulate at the edges of episodes, in the background of scenes, in the faces of people who appear once and are not seen again. Springfield is not populated by characters. It is populated by people. The distinction matters, because people have interiority that characters may or may not have been given, and the interiority of Springfield's invisible population is one of the show's great unexplored territories. Consider the employees of the nuclear plant who are not Homer, Lenny, or Carl. The show has populated the plant's workforce with background figures who appear in the cafeteria and the locker rooms and the corridors, doing the work that keeps the facility running. These people have been exposed to the same environment as Homer. They have the same contamination in their water, breathe the same compromised air. They have presumably developed the same adaptive biology, the same compromised critical capacity, the same relationship to the plant that the show has documented in Homer across 36 years. But they are not Homer. They are not the show's protagonist. They did not marry Marge or have Bart and Lisa and Maggie. They went home to their own houses, their own families, their own versions of the life that the plant's employment makes possible and the plant's contamination makes difficult. What are those lives like? The show has never asked, but the contamination theory, extended consistently, says that every person working in that plant, every family living downwind, every child drinking from the same water supply, is experiencing some version of what Homer experiences. The cognitive erosion, the inexplicable healing, The specific quality of a life shaped by forces that the person living it cannot clearly perceive. There are 30, 40, 50 people in the background of the plant's cafeteria scene. All of them have families. All of them have histories. All of them have the specific weight of being a person in a town like Springfield, working for a man like Burns, in a facility whose relationship to their health has never been honestly disclosed. The show cannot tell all of their stories. This is understood. But the awareness that they have stories that the Springfield visible in each episode is the surface of a Springfield that extends in every direction beyond the frame of the shot, changes how the visible parts feel. It gives the comedy a specific density, a weight that is not only in the jokes but in everything around them. Hans Moleman appears in the background and dies, and comes back and dies again. He is 31 years old. Whatever happened to him happened to a real person, real within the show's logic, and that person has never had his story told and never will, because the story that was done to him is not one that fits inside a comedic format, and the comedic format is the only format available. He walks across the back of the shot. He is hit by something. He falls. And by the next episode, he is walking across another background in another scene, ready to be hit again, because Springfield requires his presence without ever requiring that his presence be explained. This is Springfield's relationship to its invisible population. It requires them. It has always required them. The town does not function without the people no one looks at, without the labor no one acknowledges, without the lives that run in the background of the lives the show actually follows. And those lives are there. Fully present, fully real, fully shaped by every force the show has documented: the contamination, the economics, the institutional failures, the specific quality of existing in a town that has organized itself around forgetting what it needs to forget and seeing only what it can afford to see. They go home in the evening, they put their children to bed, they sit with the specific weight of their days, and they find what they can to make the weight bearable. They wake up in the morning, and they do it again. Springfield runs on what they carry. It always has. It just has not said so. Number. Final section continued, the loop and what it holds. Let's sit with this for a moment before it ends. The couch gag runs. It has run at the beginning of every episode since 1989. It runs in 1,000 variations. The family approaches the couch from different directions, through different obstacles, by different means, and they always end up in the same place. Together on the couch, in front of the television, in the living room on Evergreen Terrace, where they have always been and will always be. The gag is about the loop. It has always been about the loop. The specifics change, the family arrives differently, the journey to the couch varies, but the destination is fixed. They end up there. They always end up there. And what the gag is doing, underneath the joke of it, is establishing from the very first moment of every episode that this is a show about return. About the consistent, reliable, structurally guaranteed return to the same place, the same people, the same couch, regardless of what happened in the episode before, and regardless of what the current episode is about to put them through. The couch gag is a promise. It says, whatever happens, they come home. Whatever the episode contains, whatever catastrophe or comedy or quietly devastating emotional moment, the family ends up on the couch, together, in the place they belong to. This is the most fundamental argument the show makes, running beneath every theory we have examined, beneath the radiation and the coma and the institutional corruption and the collected damage of 36 years of existence in a town that is not organized to help its residents become more than they already are. The argument is, the family is the thing that holds, not the institutions, not the economy, not the civic fabric of a town that makes truth illegal and exiles the people who insist on speaking it, not the systems that have been quietly shaping and limiting and contaminating these lives for longer than anyone in them can clearly remember. The family, the specific warmth of people who know each other completely, who have seen each other at their worst and are still there, who show up with the reliability of gravity and the constancy of something that has been running long enough to feel like the natural order of things. Homer is not a good man by any neutral assessment. He is selfish, impulsive, frequently cruel without intending cruelty, cognitively limited in ways that have produced genuine harm for the people he loves most. These are real failures. The show has never minimized them, and he comes home every day. He finds his way back to the house on Evergreen Terrace with a reliability that transcends his limitations, that operates independently of whatever went wrong that day. That is not a function of his values or his character, but of something more fundamental, a pull toward the specific gravity of his family that is too strong to be overridden by any of the things that override everything else about him. Marge stays. This is the choice the show asks us to sit with most consistently, and it is the choice that critics of the show's earlier seasons found most troubling. She stays with a man who is difficult to live with, who does not always see her clearly, who has caused her genuine harm in the ways that thoughtless people cause harm to the people closest to them. She stays because the love is real. The show has never offered any other explanation, and it is the only explanation needed, because love, actual love, the sustained commitment to another person's well-being that operates independently of whether the person is currently making the commitment easy, is its own explanation. It does not require external justification. It requires only that it be real, and in Marge's case, it is. The show has given her the opportunity to leave, not through dramatic plot devices, but through the quieter mechanism of showing her, in various episodes, what the life that excluded Homer might look like. And she has seen it. She has understood the comparison. She has made the choice that the comparison is available to inform. She stays. Bart and Lisa love each other with the specific ferocity of siblings who have been through too much together to pretend they are anything other than essential to each other. The rivalry is real. The frustration is real. The moments of genuine antagonism are real. And underneath all of it, the love is real, not as an occasional thing, not as something that surfaces only in crises, but as the constant background against which everything else between them happens. The fighting is sibling fighting. The love is bone deep. Maggie watches all of it. From behind the pacifier, from the position in the room that nobody pays enough attention to, she watches her family with the full engagement of an intelligence that has decided, for its own good reasons, that watching is more useful than being watched. She is collecting something. The show has never told us what, but the collection is deliberate, and the deliberateness is patient, and the patience suggests a timeline that extends beyond anything the show has yet revealed. Whatever Maggie is waiting for, the family will be there when she does it. They will be on the couch, they will be in the house. They will be exactly where they have always been, because the couch gag guarantees it, and the loop requires it, and something in us, the us that pressed play in 1989 and never fully pressed stop, needs it to be true. This is where every theory we have examined converges. Not in an explanation, because the theories do not produce a single explanation. They produce a set of lenses, each of which shows you a different aspect of the same thing. The radiation lens shows you a contaminated zone where the rules of biology have been altered. The coma lens shows you a dying man dreaming about love. The institutional lens shows you the machinery of a system that keeps people in their places through the accumulation of small compressions. The collective denial lens shows you a community that has organized its survival around the agreement not to look. But all of these lenses, pointed at the same thing, show you a family sitting on a couch, in a house, on a street, in a town that should not be able to exist but does, that should not have continued as long as it has but has, that should have run out of stories decades ago but keeps finding new ones because the people inside it keep being people, complicated, damaged, loving, limited, extraordinary people who have not yet finished becoming what they are. The loop does not trap them. The loop holds them. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. We pressed play. We watched. We came back. We pressed play again. And across 36 years and 700 episodes, something accumulated in us that corresponds to the thing accumulating in the house on Evergreen Terrace. A kind of love for these people that does not make complete sense in terms of anything they have done to earn it. A love that is prior to merit, that exists because it exists, that is not diminished by Homer's failures or increased by Lisa's achievements, but is simply there, constant as the couch, permanent as the opening credits, reliable as the theme song that tells you, you are home now. You are back. Everything is exactly where you left it. The Springfield Iceberg goes deep. We have followed it a long way down tonight, through contamination and conspiracy and institutional failure and the quiet devastation of lives shaped by forces they cannot see. We have found damage at every level. Real damage, the kind that does not simply resolve when the episode ends. And we have also found at every level, the family. The specific warmth of people who cannot escape each other and have stopped trying because escaping each other would mean losing the thing that makes Springfield, for all its impossibility, a place worth dreaming about. Homer is still in the coma, Or Homer woke up in 1993 and has been living a cartoon life ever since. Or the radiation theory is correct and the yellow skin is evidence of a contamination that goes all the way down. Or Springfield is simply a town, a made-up town, drawn by human hands, populated by characters who were invented by a person who wanted to make something funny and true, and the truth it contains is richer than any single theory can hold. All of these things can be simultaneously true in the way that the best stories are simultaneously true at every level they operate on. The Simpsons is the longest-running show in the history of American television. It will have been running for longer by the time you finish this. And somewhere in Springfield, which is everywhere and nowhere, which is your town and my town and every town and no town, the lights are still on. The Quick E-Mart is open. Mo is polishing the glass. The cooling towers are still cracking. The fish in the river has 3 eyes. The principal is still performing an identity that belongs to someone else. The man who shot Mr. Burns, whoever that was, has never been fully held accountable. Homer is still in his chair, or still in his hospital bed, or still in his kitchen, depending on which theory you are reading through. And Maggie is watching all of it with those enormous eyes, behind that pacifier, waiting for the moment she has always been waiting for. And we are watching too. That is the part of this that is simply true, without theory, without interpretation. We are watching. We have been watching for 36 years. We are watching tonight, in the dark, wherever you are, at whatever time it is, wherever you are watching from. We built the loop. We have always been part of the loop. Every theory we've examined in these pages is a way of asking, why can't we stop? And the answer is always the same. We cannot stop because it is not finished. Because something in there is still unresolved. Because Homer has not yet figured out the thing he needs to figure out, and Lisa has not yet been fully heard, and Maggie has not yet spoken, and the loop keeps running because we are not ready for it to stop. Maybe we never will be. Maybe that is the whole point. They always are. Number SUPP Lamental. The Springfield Memory Problem. There is something deeply unusual about the way time moves through Springfield. Not the floating timeline that has been established, examined, and theorized across the preceding sections with the thoroughness it deserves. This is something different. This is not the structural mechanism by which the show's narrative time operates, but the lived experience of time within the show itself. The way the characters of Springfield move through time. The way they remember, and more significantly, the way they forget. Springfield forgets at a rate that should not be possible for a community of functioning adults. Events that would constitute the defining experiences of any normal person's life. Events that would restructure how you understood your community, your institutions, your neighbor, your own safety are processed in Springfield and then dissolved. The dissolution is not slow. It is not a gradual fading of the kind that ordinary memory produces. It is rapid, total, and reliable enough to constitute a systemic feature rather than an individual psychological response. The town was sealed under a glass dome by the Environmental Protection Agency. This happened. The federal government determined that Springfield was so contaminated that physical containment was the only viable response to the threat it posed to the surrounding region. The people of Springfield experienced this. They lived inside the dome. They experienced the specific claustrophobia of being sealed from the rest of the country by a structure that announced, in unambiguous terms, that their town was classified as an environmental disaster. And then the dome came down, and the next episode began. And nobody mentioned the dome. Nobody in Springfield's community conversations referenced the experience of having been sealed inside a government containment structure. Nobody adjusted their assessment of the nuclear plant that caused the contamination level that triggered the federal response. Nobody held a town meeting to discuss what the EPA's decision said about the safety of their water, their air, their children's biological development. The dome happened, and then it did not happen, in the sense that matters for how a community processes a shared experience. It became one of the many things that Springfield experienced and then agreed, through the silent social mechanism depicted explicitly in the Principal and the Pauper episode, to treat as not having happened. This is abnormal. It is clinically abnormal in ways that the radiation theory provides a specific mechanism for explaining. Chronic neurological damage sustained over years of exposure to contamination does not produce amnesia in the dramatic sense of the word. It does not erase specific memories the way a traumatic brain injury might. What it does is affect the capacity for memory consolidation, the capacity to integrate new experiences into a coherent, ongoing narrative of how the world works and what has happened to you in it. People with compromised consolidation capacity do not forget events in the sense of being unable to recall them when asked. They forget events in the more functionally significant sense of being unable to maintain those events in the active framework through which they interpret the world. The memory exists. The integration does not. The event happened and can be recalled if someone raises it, but it does not inform behavior because it has not been incorporated into the operational model through which behavior is generated. This is why Springfield can experience a catastrophe and then behave, in all subsequent episodes, as though the catastrophe did not occur. The events are stored. They are simply not integrated. And the lack of integration is not a choice. It is a consequence of what the contamination has done to the neurological substrate through which integration would otherwise happen. The radiation theory and the memory problem are not separate mysteries. They are the same mystery. The yellow skin, the abnormal biology, and the impossible collective amnesia are all expressions of the same underlying cause, examined from different angles. Burns knows this. This is the detail that the show makes almost explicit if you are willing to follow the implications. He knows what chronic radiation exposure does to the brain because he has been managing his own exposure for over a century, and his medical team's understanding of radiation's effects is sophisticated enough to extend to the neurological. He knows that the people of Springfield are not capable of sustaining the kind of organized, persistent opposition to his facility that would be required to actually challenge him, because the same contamination that makes them sick in the measurable ways has also compromised the specific cognitive capacity that organized opposition requires. He does not need to suppress individual memories. The environmental conditions suppress the integration of memories at scale, across the entire population, without his direct intervention. The plant is both the weapon and the cover. It contaminates the water and the air, and the contamination prevents the population from maintaining a clear enough picture of their situation to effectively challenge the contamination. The loop closes. The system is self-sustaining. This is darker than anything the show ever states directly, but it is consistent with everything the show has shown you, assembled into a coherent structure that the show has been building one detail at a time for 36 years. The people of Springfield forget because forgetting is what their environment has trained their brains to do. And Burns has known this since before most of them were born. Number, supplemental. The Springfield economics nobody examines. Springfield has a functioning economy, in the sense that goods and services are exchanged, businesses operate, employment exists, and people sustain themselves at various levels of comfort and precarity. But the structure of that economy, how the money actually moves, who it moves toward, what it does to the people it passes through is something the show has documented across its entire run, without the characters ever stopping to examine it. The nuclear power plant is the anchor of Springfield's economy. This is not a metaphor. It is a literal structural reality. The plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population, directly and through the secondary businesses that service its workforce and their families. It provides the electrical power on which every other economic activity in the town depends. It is the single largest contributor to the local tax base, through whatever arrangements Burns has negotiated with the relevant authorities, which, given Burns's political influence, are almost certainly arrangements that favor the plant's bottom line over the public fisc. Remove the plant, and Springfield's economy does not contract, it collapses. This is not speculation. The show has depicted what happens to Springfield when Burns briefly threatens to close or relocate the facility. The town's commercial life wobbles. The businesses that service the plant's workforce feel the effect immediately. The interdependencies reveal themselves with a speed and totality that makes the scope of the dependency undeniable. This dependency is Burns's most powerful tool, and it is a tool he has never had to deploy explicitly because its existence is sufficient. You do not need to threaten to close a facility if everyone in the town already understands, at a visceral level, that the facility's closure would end their economic security. The threat does not need to be stated. It hangs in the air of every council meeting, every regulatory discussion, every moment when anyone in Springfield gets close to asking a question that Burns would prefer not to have asked. The question dissolves before it is fully formed, because the person forming it has already done the math on what challenging Burns costs, and the math always comes out the same way. This is the economic architecture of a company town, which is what Springfield is in every meaningful sense. A place where the economy is structured around a single employer whose power extends far beyond the conventional scope of an employment relationship. A place where the employer's interests and the town's interests have been so thoroughly conflated by decades of dependency that the distinction between them has become practically meaningless. Where challenging the employer is not a labor action or a regulatory inquiry or a civic matter, it is an existential threat to the community itself because the community's existence has been made to depend on the employer's continued goodwill. This is how captive communities work. This is what Burns has constructed across the decades of the show's history, not through dramatic villainy, but through the patient, systematic construction of dependencies that make resistance structurally equivalent to self-destruction. The businesses of Springfield, the Quick E-Mart, Moe's Tavern, the various shops and services that populate the town's commercial landscape are all downstream of the plant. Their customers are plant employees and their families and the businesses that serve plant employees and their families. The economic graph of Springfield, if you traced it, would show a web of connections that all originate from the same single point. Burns Industries, the plant, the man behind the fence. The shop owners of Springfield are not employees of Burns, but they are dependent on his continued operation in a way that is almost indistinguishable from employment in terms of the power relationship it creates. If Burns is unhappy with the town's regulatory environment, he can adjust the plant's employment level in ways that reduce the customer base for every business in Springfield. He does not need to threaten this explicitly. Everyone understands it. The understanding shapes behavior at every level of the town's civic and economic life. This is why the contamination continues, not because nobody knows about it, not because the evidence is insufficient, but because addressing it would require confronting Burns in a context where Burns holds all the leverage and the confronters hold none. The three-eyed fish created a moment of apparent political jeopardy for Burns. A gubernatorial candidate made it a campaign issue. There was national attention. There was a moment when the weight of evidence seemed sufficient to produce a consequence. And then Burns ate the fish on television and the moment passed, because the moment was always going to pass. Because the structures that protect Burns from accountability are not primarily political or legal, they are economic, and economic dependencies do not dissolve because of a campaign commercial or a news cycle. They dissolve only when the people who depend on them have a viable alternative, and in Springfield, Burns has made sure for decades that no viable alternative exists. The town does not challenge Burns. The town cannot afford to challenge Burns, and Burns has made very sure that the town cannot afford to, because the cost of not being able to afford it is so small compared to the cost of what would have to change if the town could. That is Springfield's economy. That is the structure that holds everything else in place. Not through dramatic malevolence, but through the patient, systematic construction of a situation where the people most harmed by the status quo are the same people who most depend on the status quo continuing. Burns did not invent this structure. He inherited it, refined it, and has maintained it with the specific competence of someone who understands, with full clarity, exactly what he is maintaining and why. The fluorescent lights at the Quickie Mart are powered by the nuclear plant. The beer at Moe's is refrigerated by the nuclear plant. The school's lights come from the nuclear plant. Everything in Springfield runs on power generated by a facility that is poisoning the people it serves, and the people it serves cannot afford to turn it off. And they know this, and they know that Burns knows this, and they go to work in the morning and come home in the evening and sit on the couch and watch television, and the lights stay on, and the couch gag runs, and the theme song plays, and everything is exactly as it has always been. Until tomorrow, when it will be exactly the same again. Number, supplemental, the Maggie timeline. Everything we know about Maggie Simpson could be contained in a very short list. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She communicates primarily through the mechanical sound of her pacifier and the expressive range of her eyes, which is, in practice, an enormous expressive range. She is capable of conveying disgust, joy, skepticism, love, patience, and calculation through those eyes in ways that make the eyes of more verbose characters seem comparatively limited. She has shot a man. The man she shot was the most powerful person in Springfield. The evidence against her was contested. The case was closed without a conviction because no jury would convict a baby, and the case was closed. She has led a daycare rebellion. This is the event that the longest daycare short film documents with more honesty than the show's regular format allows. She organized infants, coordinated the behavior of pre-verbal children who have no shared language and no established social bonds around a shared goal, and she executed the plan with patience and creative problem-solving that the adults around her were not watching closely enough to understand they were witnessing. She has saved her family from threats they were not aware of and could not have addressed without her. She has done this without acknowledgement, without recognition, without anyone in the family fully understanding what she had done and what it cost her to do it. She has been tested. The results suggest intelligence that is not easily measured by the instruments available, because the instruments available were designed to measure intelligence in the range they were expecting to find. And Maggie's intelligence, if the pattern of the show's depictions is taken seriously, operates at a level that puts it outside the expected range. And she has not spoken, not consistently, not meaningfully, not in a way that has altered anyone's assessment of who she is and what she is capable of. She has maintained the silence through every episode, every situation, every moment when speaking would have been the obvious response to what was happening around her. The theory that Maggie is silent by choice, rather than by developmental limitation, is the most interesting one the show supports. And the evidence for it is not subtle. A child who cannot speak does not look around carefully before reenacting a shooting. A child who cannot speak does not construct multi-step plans to protect a butterfly from a bully in a daycare setting. A child who cannot speak does not make the specific kind of eye contact that Maggie makes, the eye contact that communicates, unmistakably to anyone paying attention, that the person behind the eyes is fully there and fully aware and fully choosing what is being expressed through them. Maggie has chosen silence. This is the premise that makes her story coherent. And the reason she has chosen it, the reason that the show has provided across dozens of episodes, is the observation she has been making since the day she was born, which is that being heard is not what you might expect it to be. Lisa is brilliant and is not heard. Lisa has been talking clearly, correctly, with full documentation of her analysis for the entirety of the show's run, and the rate at which her insight is acted upon by the people around her is low enough to constitute a data point about the relationship between speaking and being heard. Speaking is not sufficient. Being right is not sufficient. Being present and vocal and persistent and clearly correct is not, in Springfield, sufficient to ensure that anything changes because of what you are saying. Maggie watched this. And Maggie decided, the decision is strategic in ways that an infant should not be capable of executing as a strategy, which means either that the show is not asking us to take the developmental timeline seriously, which is plausible, given the floating timeline and the general liberties the format takes with reality, or that something has happened to Maggie's cognitive development that has produced capabilities that are genuinely extraordinary. The radiation theory has an answer. The same environmental contamination that reduced Homer's cognitive capacity has, through whatever mechanism governs how radiation interacts with developing neurology, amplified Maggie's to levels that are not easily categorized. She is, in this reading, the most extreme positive expression of what the contamination does when it goes the other way. Not damage, but augmentation. Not the reduction of capacity, but the generation of capacities that would not otherwise exist. This does not make the contamination good. It does not mean that what Burns is doing to Springfield is anything other than what it is. It means that complex systems produce complex outcomes, and the outcome of Maggie Nahasapi Mapetalon, Maggie Simpson, is not reducible to a simple narrative of harm. She is what she is. She is watching what she is watching. She is waiting for whatever she is waiting for. The pacifier moves, the eyes do not close. Springfield will not see it coming. Springfield never does. Number. Supplemental. The final question. We have spent a very long time in Springfield. We have followed every major theory to its logical conclusion. We have traced the connections between the contamination and the memory problem, and the institutional failures, and the economic dependency, and the silence that covers all of it. We have looked at the characters whose stories the show has been telling, and the characters whose stories the show has been documenting in the background without quite acknowledging them as stories. And at the end of all of it, the question that none of the theories quite answers is still there, waiting patiently in the way that the most important questions wait. Why does any of it matter? Not to Springfield. Springfield has been established thoroughly and with considerable evidence, as a community that does not allow itself to ask that question and answer it honestly. Not to Burns, who has organized his entire existence around ensuring that the question never acquires enough force to threaten him. Not to the contaminated and cognitively compromised population of a town that has been told, through every mechanism available to the people who control its information environment, that everything is fine. Why does it matter to us? We are watching from outside the loop. We have the critical distance that Springfield's residents do not have. We can see the contamination and the manipulation and the institutional failure and the collective denial from a position that those living inside it cannot access. We have, presumably, the cognitive resources to integrate what we are seeing into an ongoing understanding of how the world works and who benefits from its current arrangement. So why do we keep watching? Why does the show, which contains all of this darkness woven into every episode, produce in us the specific warmth that it produces the feeling of coming home, of returning to a place that knows us, of being in the company of people we love despite everything? The answer is not that the darkness doesn't matter. The answer is that the love is real alongside the darkness, that both things are simultaneously present, that the show has never resolved them into a single, clean emotional register, and that this is the most honest thing about it, because this is how it actually is. The contamination is real, the love is real, the institutional failure is real, the warmth of a family on a couch on a Sunday evening is real, the exploitation is real, the joy is real. We keep watching because the show keeps showing us both, because it refuses to make it clean, because it insists on the contamination and the love being part of the same story, because they are part of the same story, because that is how it actually works in the lives the show is mapping, and in the lives we are living outside the frame. The iceberg goes all the way down, and at the bottom of it, underneath every dark discovery, underneath the radiation and the coma and the conspiracy and the decades of accumulated damage, there is a family. There is a couch. There is the specific quality of an evening at home with the people who know you completely and choose you anyway. That is what we were looking for when we pressed play. And it is what we found. Even in Springfield. Especially in Springfield. Number. Deep dive. The Burns dynasty. A century of managed power. Before there was a Springfield worth contaminating, there was a Burns family. The show has established this across dozens of episodes, through references and flashbacks, and the occasional depiction of Charles Montgomery Burns at various points in his impossibly long life. The Burns family is not a recent construction. It is not a success story of the kind that American mythology prefers, the self-made man rising from modest origins through exceptional effort. The Burns family represents a much older kind of wealth, the kind that predates the social frameworks designed to limit it, that was established in conditions where the accumulation of what you could take was not meaningfully constrained by the rights of the people you took it from. Burns's family wealth, as the show has depicted it, has roots in the 19th century. In the Gilded Age, in the specific kind of industrial fortune that was built during the period when the United States was transitioning from an agricultural economy to an industrial one, and the mechanisms for managing that transition in the public interest had not yet developed sufficient force to constrain the people doing the transitioning. The fortunes made in that period were made in conditions of minimal regulatory constraint, minimal labor protection, and a legal environment that treated the rights of capital as considerably more compelling than the rights of the workers and communities that the capital depended on. Burns did not make that fortune. He was born into it, but he has maintained it, extended it, and adapted it to successive eras of American economic history with a sophistication that speaks to either genuine intelligence or very good advice or both. The fortune that was built by taking everything available from the people who could not stop it has been maintained. Across the decades of Burns's personal history, through the development of increasingly sophisticated mechanisms for continuing to take everything available from the people who cannot stop it. The nuclear plant is the current expression of this. It is the 20th and 21st century iteration of the Burns family's fundamental business model, which is identify something that people cannot live without, establish control over it, and charge for access in ways that the people paying have no meaningful ability to resist. In the Gilded Age, it was industrial production and the infrastructure it required. In Springfield's present, it is electricity, without which the modern life that Springfield's residents have built for themselves cannot function. The genius of the current iteration, if genius is the right word for something this cold, is that it is invisible in ways that earlier iterations were not. You can see a factory. You can see who owns it. You can stand outside the gate and understand, in material terms, the relationship between you and the person on the other side of it. The nuclear plant is different. The relationship between the plant and the community it serves is mediated by technology that most of the community cannot fully understand, through infrastructure that is mostly underground, through processes that are invisible by nature and made more invisible by the specific interest of the plant's owner in maintaining that invisibility. Burns does not want Springfield to understand the nuclear plant. He wants them to understand the electricity, the thing the plant produces that they need, while remaining ignorant of the process that produces it and the costs, environmental and biological, that the process distributes through the community without its knowledge or consent. This is the architecture of invisible extraction. You pay for the product, you absorb the costs. You do not understand the connection between the product you paid for and the costs you are absorbing, because the connection runs through a black box that the person who built the black box has very strong reasons for keeping closed. Springfield's residents pay their electricity bills. The money goes to Burns, the plant operates, the contamination continues. The costs, the yellow skin, the cognitive damage, the three-eyed fish, the cracked cooling towers that have never been fixed are distributed through the community, through water and air, and the food that comes from contaminated sources. The community pays for its own contamination, month after month, in electricity bills that fund the facility that is damaging them. This is what the Burns dynasty has been doing, in various forms, for over a century. And the nuclear plant is simply the most elegant iteration of the model, because its costs are genuinely invisible in ways that its predecessors' costs were not. The Gilded Age industrialist poisoned rivers that people could see being poisoned. The pollution was visible. It smelled bad. You could watch the fish dying in real time. This visibility created the possibility of accountability, not a certainty, but a possibility. People could point at the dead river and say, that is what is being done to us. The connection between cause and effect was legible. Radiation contamination at subdramatic levels, the kind that does not produce immediate visible illness, but accumulates over years into cognitive damage and biological mutation, is not like the dead river. You cannot smell it. You cannot see it in the water. You cannot point at the moment when the exposure produced the damage, because the exposure is continuous and the damage is cumulative, and the connection between them requires a kind of scientific literacy that the educational system that Burns's economic dominance has kept underfunded does not reliably produce. He has built a contamination that cannot be directly perceived and maintained, an educational system that cannot explain the connection even if the contamination were perceived. The two pieces fit together with a precision that does not require any individual to have explicitly planned their combination. The system is self-sustaining. The contamination impairs the cognition. The impaired cognition fails to produce the educational outcomes that would allow the contamination to be understood. The failure to understand the contamination prevents the accountability that would address it. The accountability does not arrive. The plant continues. This is the Burns dynasty in its final and most complete form. Not a man with a plan. A man with a system that has been running long enough to have eliminated most of the conditions under which it might be challenged. He is old enough to have seen every challenge fail. He has watched reform movements rise and spend themselves against the wall of his institutional durability. He has watched politicians arrive with mandates and leave with compromises. He has watched regulatory initiatives develop sufficient force to require responses and been patient enough to outlast them, because regulatory initiatives have political cycles and political cycles have ends, and Burns has been around long enough to know that the end of a political cycle is when you get back what the cycle temporarily restricted. He is not immortal. He is something more practically powerful than immortal. He is patient. He is capitalized. He is insulated from the normal consequences of the things he does by the wealth that was never his alone but has been his to direct. And he has directed it, consistently and with full understanding of what he is directing, toward the single goal that the Burns dynasty has always pursued. Keep the system running. Keep the power on. Keep the population dependent. Keep the opposition disorganized. Keep going. He is still going. He will still be going tomorrow. Number. Deep dive. The Homer problem revisited. We have established that Homer Simpson is cognitively limited in ways that the show traces to specific causes. The crayon, the radiation, The accumulated effects of decades of living in Springfield's contaminated environment. We have established that this limitation is not his natural state, that without the specific insults to his neurological function, he would be someone considerably different from the man the show depicts. But here is the thing about Homer Simpson that the damage does not explain and the theories do not fully capture. He is, despite everything, fundamentally decent. Not in a simple way. Not in a way that cancels out the harm he causes or the failures that are genuinely his. Not in a way that asks us to overlook the specific quality of his thoughtlessness, which is the specific quality of thoughtlessness that comes from a person whose critical function is impaired in exactly the ways that would make him most likely to cause harm without noticing. His decency is real and it coexists with real damage. But it is there. It is there in the way he loves his children fiercely, completely, with a totality that does not qualify itself or reserve itself against the possibility of disappointment. He loves Bart and Lisa and Maggie with an openness that is, in its way, one of the most unusual things about him. Because most people who have experienced the specific losses Homer has experienced, the absent mother, the emotionally distant father, the accumulated damage of a childhood in which he was not fully seen, developed the protective calculus of loving less as a defense against losing what they love. Homer did not. Or the damage that took things from him did not take that particular thing. He loves without reserve, which means he is exposed in ways that cause him pain, and he absorbs the pain and keeps loving at the same level as before the pain arrived. This is remarkable. It is not highlighted by the show as remarkable because the show presents it as simply part of who Homer is, part of the texture of his character that is so constant it has become background. But take it out of context. Look at it against the history of what has been done to him, and the fact that he is still capable of it, that it survived everything that was done to him, is one of the most striking things in the show. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the conspiracy theory of Mona's exile, and Burns's manipulation, all of these depict Homer as a victim of forces that shaped him without his knowledge or consent. This is true. He is a victim of those forces. He is also a person whose response to being victimized has been, fundamentally and consistently, to love the people around him as much as his limitations allow. To show up for his family with the complete and reliable presence that his emotional intelligence, damaged as it is in most dimensions, remains capable of. To find his way home every evening, not because he is virtuous in a calculated way, but because home is where Marge is, and where the kids are, and where the couch is, and where the beer is cold, and because those things are, for Homer Simpson, the complete catalog of what he needs. He does not need achievement. He does not need recognition. He does not need the world to understand him or to reward him or to treat him with the respect that would acknowledge what has been taken from him. He needs the house on Evergreen Terrace and the family inside it. Burns took his mother. Burns maintained the conditions that impaired his cognition. Burns is responsible, in ways Homer has never been able to clearly perceive and articulate, for the specific shape of the damage that has defined Homer's adult life. And Homer goes to work at the plant every morning. He sits in his chair in Sector 7G. He falls asleep. He wakes up. He makes a mistake. He goes home. He is not seeking justice. He is not building toward a confrontation. He is not accumulating evidence or nursing a grievance or planning anything at all. He is doing what he has always done, which is to find the next moment and live inside it with the full commitment of someone whose cognitive apparatus, despite all it has lost, retains the specific capacity to be completely present in what is right in front of him. Maybe that is the most radical thing about Homer Simpson. Not his stupidity, which is what everyone notices first. Not his resilience, which is what the theories explain. But the specific quality of a person who has been thoroughly damaged and thoroughly failed by the systems around him, and who has never, not once, organized that damage into resentment that would close him off from the people he loves. The love stays open, despite everything. That is the Homer problem. Not a problem in the sense of a flaw to be explained, but a problem in the sense of a mystery to be sat with. How does a person who has been treated the way Homer has been treated remain capable of the love he is capable of? The theories do not answer this. The theories explain the damage. They do not explain what survives the damage. Something survives. Something in Homer Simpson that was always there, that the crayon could not reach and the radiation could not alter, and Burns's century of manipulation could not touch. Something that goes home every evening and sits on the couch and puts his arm around his wife and is, in the specific and total way of the particular kind of person Homer is, happy. That is the thing the iceberg does not reach. That is the thing at the center of the show that none of the darkness surrounds completely, because it is the thing the darkness was arranged around. The warmth, the specific, persistent, inexplicable warmth. It was there in 1989. It is still there. It will be there tomorrow. When Homer goes to work and comes home and the credits roll and the couch gag plays and the family sits down together and the television glows and the evening begins again. Number. Deep. Dive. The sound of Springfield. There is a piece of music that you know. You know it in the specific way you know things that were present before you had the conscious capacity to be aware of being aware. The theme from The Simpsons, the one Danny Elfman wrote, the one that runs under the opening credits, is one of those pieces. It is embedded at a level that precedes criticism or analysis. It arrives, and something in you responds to it that does not pass through the deliberative mind first. The sound of Springfield is not only the theme, though the theme is the most concentrated expression of it. It is the sax solo that represents Lisa's inner life. It is the specific clang of Homer's workplace, the sound of a facility that is large and industrial and has been running for decades without adequate maintenance. It is the bell of Springfield Elementary, which is exactly the kind of institutional bell that embeds itself in the nervous system through years of association with specific transitions, the end of something, the beginning of something else, the rigid punctuation of a day that someone else has structured for you. It is the sound of Moe's bar, the specific acoustic quality of a room that has been absorbing noise for decades, where the sounds of decades of conversations and arguments and quiet drinking and the occasional eruption of something louder have been absorbed into the walls and the floor and the long institutional history of the space. A bar sounds different from any other kind of room. Moe's sounds different from any other kind of bar. It is the pacifier, the mechanical, rhythmic sound of Maggie's constant companion, which has appeared in every episode as a kind of metronome marking time, marking presence, marking the specific quality of attention that Maggie brings to every situation she is present in. The pacifier is not incidental. It is Maggie's signature in the sonic landscape of the show, the same way the saxophone is Lisa's signature. It identifies her. It says, she is here. She is watching. She has not yet spoken. The sound of Springfield is the composite of all of these things, running under all of the images and the dialogue and the comedy and the darkness, constituting the sensory environment that the show has created with such consistency across so many years that it has become part of the atmospheric backdrop of a specific kind of American life. The lives of the people who grew up with this show, the lives of the people who discovered it as adults and then went back and watched the earlier seasons and then went back further, the lives of the people watching tonight, wherever they are, at whatever time it is. Sound does something different from image. Image occupies the analytical mind in ways that allow criticism and analysis and the deliberate engagement with what is being shown. Sound slides under the analytical mind. It reaches the part of the brain that organizes emotional response before the analytical mind has had time to prepare a framework for it. The Simpsons theme does not ask you to think about Springfield. It takes you there. The transition is immediate and complete. You hear the first few notes, and you are in the opening credits, watching the family drive home from their various places, converging on the couch with the reliability that the couch gag captures and distills. You are home. The show has brought you home with 16 seconds of orchestration. This is the mechanism behind the show's longevity that no theory about contamination or coma or institutional failure fully captures. The theories explain the content. The sound explains the return. People come back to this show not only because the content rewards analysis or because the characters are genuinely beloved, though both of these things are true. They come back because the sound has been conditioning a specific emotional response for long enough that the response has become automatic. You hear the theme, you feel the warmth of the particular thing the show has always represented for you. The warmth is prior to any analysis of whether the show deserves it. It exists in the body before it exists in the mind. And then the couch gag runs. And the episode begins, and Springfield does whatever Springfield is going to do this week. And at the end, the credits run, and the music plays, and you are returned to the world outside the show, carrying whatever the episode left in you, ready to return when the loop comes around again. The sound of Springfield is the sound of a specific kind of American domesticity at a specific moment in American cultural history, crystallized and preserved by the accident of a cartoon that ran long enough to become the container for something that had nowhere else to go. The feelings that the show produces are not always feelings about the show. They are feelings about the time in your life when you first watched it, about the couch you sat on, about the people you sat on it with, about what has changed since then and what has stayed the same. The show does not change. You do. And the contrast between the show's constancy and your own movement through time is itself part of the experience. Springfield is always where you left it. It is the constant against which your own change becomes visible. That is what the sound is doing. That is what it has always been doing. It is keeping Springfield here, exactly where we need it to be, for when we need to come back. Number, deep, dive, what the guest stars actually tell us. The Simpsons has featured more celebrity guest appearances than any other show in the history of television. This is not a casual claim. The number, across the full run of the series, runs into the hundreds. Musicians, athletes, politicians, actors, writers, philosophers, world leaders, scientists, comedians, athletes, artists. The show has pulled virtually every major cultural figure of the last 4 decades into Springfield's orbit at one point or another, and the sheer volume of these appearances has become a defining characteristic of the show's later seasons. The standard reading of the celebrity cameo phenomenon is commercial. Famous people bring their audiences. A musician who appears on The Simpsons introduces their fan base to the show, and the show gets a ratings boost and a moment of cultural relevance that can be promoted in the weeks before the episode airs. This is true, and it explains a significant portion of the appearances. But the specific way the show handles its guest stars, across hundreds of appearances over decades, tells you something more interesting than the commercial calculus. The guest stars consistently appear as themselves. Not as characters, not in roles that distance them from their own public identity, but as the specific version of themselves that exists in the public imagination. Paul McCartney appears as Paul McCartney. Elon Musk appeared as Elon Musk. Albert Brooks, in his most celebrated appearance, plays a character who is explicitly not himself and brings to the role a specificity and depth that makes the appearance one of the show's most enduring. The distinction matters, the exception illuminates the rule. When famous people appear as themselves in Springfield, they enter a world whose visual register marks them immediately as outsiders. We have established this in the yellow skin section. The guest characters are drawn differently. Their proportions are more naturalistic. Their features are more closely connected to actual human anatomy. They look, in a word, normal in the specific sense of resembling humans, rather than the Springfield mutation of humans. And this visual difference is the show's honesty breaking through its commercial function. Because if the guest stars look normal and the residents of Springfield do not, then the visual system of the show is confirming, episode after episode, across hundreds of celebrity appearances, the distinction between people who live inside the contamination zone and people who do not. It is doing this in the most public possible format, with the most visible possible roster of outsiders, in a way that makes the distinction undeniable if you are willing to look at it directly. The celebrities walk through Springfield looking like people. The residents of Springfield do not look like people. Not quite. Not in the way the celebrities do. And this difference, replicated across hundreds of appearances over decades, is the show's accumulated evidence sitting in plain sight. Under the coma theory, the celebrity appearances serve a different function. They are fragments of the external world, reaching Homer's unconscious mind through the permeable boundary of the coma voices from the hospital room, faces from the television that someone left on, cultural references from the conversations of family members sitting at his bedside. The celebrities are real, in the specific sense that they come from outside the dream. They arrive in Springfield imperfectly translated by Homer's dreaming mind, which can render their essential quality but not their Springfieldness, because they are not Springfield people. They have never been in Springfield. They exist in the world outside the coma, and Homer's mind can access them only as impressions, accurate impressions, detailed enough to be recognizable, but fundamentally different from the residents who were already in Homer's memory when the coma began. The celebrities look different because they are different in origin. They come from outside the dream. The residents come from inside the dreamer. This is why the show can draw Michael Jackson in a way that is immediately recognizable while still making him visually distinct from every Springfield resident who has been living inside Homer's unconscious for 36 years. The coma theory does not require this reading to work. But it is available, and it makes the celebrity appearances feel like something more than commercial transactions. It makes them feel like windows. Like the points at which the boundary between Homer's interior world and the external world is briefly permeable, like the moments when something real gets in. There is also the matter of what happens to the celebrities after they leave. They return to their lives, presumably, and Springfield continues. The encounter is asymmetric. Springfield is changed by the encounter, in the sense that the episode exists. The celebrity's presence has been woven into the town's accumulated history. But the celebrity is not changed by Springfield in any lasting way. They pass through and move on. This asymmetry captures something true about the relationship between Springfield and the broader world. Springfield is shaped by what comes through it. The world that sends things through it is not shaped by Springfield's response. The town is a receiver, not a transmitter. It takes in cultural references, celebrities, external events, and processes them through its specific mechanism. But the processing does not send signals back out that change the source. Springfield is, in this sense, a very large container that has been filling up for 36 years and has never figured out how to make what it contains matter to the world outside its boundaries. Except through us. Except through the people watching who take Springfield with them when they leave, who carry its observations and its darkness and its warmth out into the world where it accumulates into the cultural presence that is the Simpsons' actual impact. We are the transmission mechanism. We are how Springfield talks to the world. We carry the show out of the loop. And the world, changed slightly by what we carried, becomes a little more like Springfield, which is what we have been documenting with the predictions phenomenon all along. Not the show predicting the world, but the show being carried into the world by the people watching it, and the world being shaped by what they carried. The celebrities arrive. They look different. They leave. And Springfield continues, in the specific, unchanging way that Springfield continues, full of the people it has always had and shaped by nothing quite enough to make it different from what it was. Until the next episode, when the loop brings everyone back to the couch. Number deep dive. The children of Springfield. A question the show has never formally addressed is what happens to Springfield's children when they grow up. Not Bart and Lisa and Maggie, who do not grow up because the loop prevents it. But the other children, the background children of Springfield Elementary, the kids in Bart's class and the kids in Lisa's class, and the kids on the playground at recess who appear in crowd scenes and never develop into named characters with sustained storylines. The children of Springfield who are living through the same environmental conditions as the Simpson kids and whose adulthood will be spent in the same town under the same conditions. These children are the future of Springfield, in the sense that they are the next generation of the population Burns requires to maintain his operation. They are the people who will replace the current workforce when the current workforce ages out, who will sit on the next generation of bar stools at Moe's, who will send the next generation of children to Springfield Elementary, who will pay the next generation of electricity bills that fund the plant that is shaping them in ways they cannot see. The show has given us glimpses of adult Springfield in flash-forward episodes, in depictions of what certain characters become, and the picture is, depending on which futures the show chooses to imagine, sometimes hopeful and sometimes not. Lisa escapes and becomes herself on a larger stage. Bart's various potential futures range from professional failure to surprising competence, depending on which episode is doing the imagining. The show has never been consistent about these futures because consistency would require committing to a trajectory that the format, with its floating timeline and its perpetual present tense, cannot sustain. But the children in the background do not escape. They do not flash forward. They stay in Springfield, and they become the adults of Springfield, and they run the businesses and staff the plant, and drink at the bar, and attend the school board meetings, and vote to maintain the comfortable lies, rather than acknowledge the uncomfortable truths. And they do this with exactly the cognitive and biological equipment that their childhood in Springfield has given them, which is to say, they do it with yellow skin and 4 fingers and the specific quality of attention that decades of environmental contamination produces in a developing nervous system. They do it with the educational framework that Springfield Elementary provided, which has prepared them to function within the existing system while being systematically incapable of challenging it. The cycle continues through them. It has always continued through them. Burns does not need to do anything different for the next generation. The system he built reproduces itself through the children who grow up inside it, who become the adults who maintain it, who send their children to the same school and work at the same plant and drink at the same bar and live in the same contaminated town and cannot clearly perceive the contamination because the contamination has shaped the perceptual apparatus they would need to clearly perceive it. This is the most complete expression of what generational systems of harm do. They do not require active maintenance. They require only that the conditions that produce the harm be maintained, and the harm will reproduce itself through the people it has shaped. Burns is old enough to have watched this happen across multiple generations. He has watched the children of the workers become workers. He has watched the educational failure reproduce itself through each cohort that passes through Springfield Elementary. He has watched the cognitive impairment pass from parents to children through the mechanism of shared environment rather than genetics. He has watched it, and he has done nothing to interrupt it, because interrupting it would mean changing the system. And the system, as currently configured, serves his interests so completely that changing it would require answering for what it has done. The children play in the playground shadow of the cooling towers. They drink from the water fountains. They go home in the afternoon to the houses their parents bought on wages the plant pays, and in the morning they come back. This is Springfield's most complete tragedy. Not the contamination of the current generation, which is ongoing and real and documented in every yellow face in every crowd scene, but the contamination of the next generation, which is being shaped right now, in classrooms and playgrounds and dinner tables and backyards, by the same forces that shaped the generation before them and the generation before that. The children who will become Springfield are already Springfield. The loop does not need a future. It just needs the present to keep producing the past. Number. Deep dive. The map that does not exist. We have established that Springfield cannot be located on any map. We have explored the theories that explain the geographic impossibility, the contamination theory, the coma theory, the collective denial theory. But there is a dimension to the location mystery that these theories do not quite capture. Springfield's unlocatability is not only a function of the show's deliberate contradiction, it is a function of what Springfield represents, which is not a place that can be found on a map because it is not the kind of thing that maps locate. Maps locate physical geography. They locate the specific coordinates of specific places. They allow you to plan a route, to know where you are going, to understand your position in relation to the surrounding world. Maps are instruments of orientation. Springfield resists orientation. It resists not because it is hiding, though the theories we have examined suggest that hiding may serve certain interests, but because it is not located in the same way that other places are located. It is located in memory, in feeling, in the specific texture of a particular kind of American life that is not tied to a geographic region but to a set of experiences that are, in various combinations and intensities, available across the entire American landscape. The small-town industrial economy with one dominant employer, the school that cannot afford to be what it should be, the bar where nothing changes and everyone is welcome to stay the same, the neighbors who are too different from you to fully understand and too close to fully ignore, the children who are going to grow up here and probably not leave and might become their parents and might not. These things exist in Ohio and Oregon and Alabama and Montana and every other state that has ever been proposed as Springfield's home. They exist in the specific combinations that Springfield depicts in rural communities and suburban ones, in northern towns and southern ones, in every corner of the American geography that has ever had the experience of being a place where the economy was organized around a single employer, whose interest in the community extended only as far as the community's utility to the employer. Springfield cannot be located because it is everywhere, not as a metaphor, as a literal description of how the show was designed and how it has functioned across its entire run. The writers did not want it to be locatable, they wanted it to be recognizable, and the path to recognizability, for a show about this kind of American life, ran precisely through the refusal of a fixed location. If Springfield were in Ohio, viewers in Oregon would experience it as a show about Ohio. They would note the Ohio-ness of it and feel the distance between Springfield and their own experience. The show would become regional rather than universal. The insights it offers about American life would be receivable only by people whose American life resembles Ohio's. By making Springfield unlocatable, the writers made it everywhere. By refusing to commit to a geography, they committed to a feeling, and the feeling is distributed more widely than any geography could be. This is the final piece of Springfield's impossibility. It is impossible geographically for the same reason it is possible emotionally. The constraints that prevent it from existing as a place are the same constraints that allow it to exist as an experience. You cannot visit Springfield, but you have been there. You have been there in every version of your life that contained a dominant employer whose interest in your community was primarily extractive. You have been there in every school that was underfunded and every bar that was the closest thing to community that the community had found. You have been there in every neighborhood where the same people were on the same stoops every evening, and the same problems were present in the morning, and the same hope persistent, possibly irrational, impossible to fully extinguish was there alongside the problems. Springfield is the map of that experience, not a geographic map, an emotional one. And emotional maps do not have fixed coordinates. They have resonance. They have recognition. They have the specific quality of arriving at a description of something you have lived and discovering that it was possible to describe. The show has been describing it for 36 years. The description has never required a state. Number. Extended. The night Springfield never sleeps. There is a quality that Springfield has at 3 in the morning that it does not have at any other hour. The streets are quiet in the particular way that only certain kinds of streets are quiet at that hour. Not abandoned, exactly. Not empty, but emptied of the particular density of daytime human activity, the commerce and motion and noise that fills the daylit hours with the sound of a community going about its business. At 3 in the morning, the business is paused. The town is between versions of itself, suspended in the gap between the day that ended and the day that has not yet begun. But Springfield does not fully sleep. The nuclear plant does not sleep. It operates continuously, around the clock, with the specific rhythm of an industrial facility whose process cannot be interrupted without consequences, far more expensive than continuous operation. The plant hums at 3 in the morning with the same low-frequency vibration it hums with at noon. The cooling towers stand against the dark sky. The glow from the facility's windows is visible from a significant portion of Springfield, a persistent illumination that has been visible at this hour for as long as the plant has been operating. The Quickie Mart does not sleep. Apu is there, or someone is there, because the store does not close. The fluorescent lights are on, the hot dogs rotate, the squishy machine produces whatever it produces at 3 in the morning, when the only customers are people who have found themselves awake at this hour for reasons that are not always comfortable to examine too directly. The store is there for them. It has always been there for them. Moe's is closed. The bar closes, eventually, though the hour at which it does so is not always clear, and the definition of closed becomes somewhat flexible when certain regulars are involved. But there is a point at which even Moe's goes dark, and the bar stools are empty, and the glasses sit in their row with the specific quality of glasses that have been rinsed but not quite cleaned, and the bar is quiet in a way that bar silence is quiet, which is a specific kind of quiet full of the presence of all the evenings the room has held. The accumulated weight of all the conversations and the laughter and the quiet drinking and the not-quite confessions. The Simpson house does not sleep, not entirely. Homer sometimes wakes at 3 in the morning from dreams that the show does not depict the coma. Theory would say these moments of Homer lying awake in the middle of the night are the moments when the dream becomes aware of itself, when the surface of the unconscious mind briefly approaches the surface of something like consciousness, and the sleeping man in the hospital bed stirs without waking. The house is quiet around him. The family sleeps. The refrigerator hums. The television in the living room is dark for once, the couch empty, the room holding its breath in the specific way that rooms hold their breath when the people who fill them with their living are temporarily absent from it. This is the hour when Springfield is most completely itself, in the sense of being most completely unobserved. During the day, the town performs. It performs the comedy and the social life and the civic participation and the commercial activity that constitute a community's daylit self-presentation. At 3 in the morning, the performance pauses. What remains is what the performance is performed over. The contamination does not pause. The water continues to carry what it carries. The air continues to hold what it holds. The accumulated damage of decades of exposure continues to be worked into the biology of every sleeping person in every house, at a cellular level that is not aware of whether it is noon or 3 in the morning. The body does what it does regardless of the hour. The environment does what it does regardless of the observer. At 3 in the morning in Springfield, the truth of the town is most visible because the things that the town uses to make itself visible during the day, the activity, the commerce, the performances of normalcy have temporarily stepped back. And what is left in that specific quiet is the plant and the water and the air and the yellow skin of the sleeping people and the hum of a facility that has been running without adequate safety precautions for longer than most of its neighbors have been alive. If you could stand at the center of Springfield at 3 in the morning and feel the full quality of the place, not hear it, not see it, but feel the specific quality of being inside this particular town at this particular hour, you would feel the hum. Low and constant and omnidirectional, the frequency of an industrial process that cannot be turned off, that runs through the earth and the air and the water and the bodies of every person sleeping in every house in the town. You would feel Springfield as it actually is, stripped of the comedy and the characters and the accumulated warmth of 36 years of episodes. You would feel the contamination zone. You would feel the weight of what has been done to this place and to the people who live in it. And then the sun would come up, and Homer would stumble downstairs for breakfast, and Bart would skate down the driveway, and Lisa would play her saxophone through the window, and Maggie would watch all of it with those enormous eyes and that mechanical pacifier sound, and Springfield would be Springfield again. The hum would still be there, under all of it. It always is. But you would not be able to feel it anymore, because there would be too much else happening, too much life and noise and motion and comedy. The performance would resume. The town would perform itself back into existence, and you would watch, and you would laugh, and you would come back next week and the week after that, because the warmth is real. Even in Springfield, even over the hum, even under the yellow sky, the warmth is real. Number, extended. The Simpsons After Dark, what the show knows that it cannot say. There are things The Simpsons knows that it cannot say. This is true of all long-running narrative works, but it is especially true of a show that has been operating within the constraints of a network comedy format for 36 years, while simultaneously accumulating the kind of thematic density that we have spent this entire document examining. The format allows certain things and prohibits others. Comedy requires certain outcomes, the reset, the survival, the return to baseline that the content the show has accumulated would, if followed honestly, never produce. The show cannot say, Springfield is a contamination zone, and the residents are dying slowly from chronic radiation exposure. It can show you a three-eyed fish and let you draw your own conclusions. It can give Homer an impossibly thick skull and an inexplicable healing capacity and let the pattern assemble itself in the mind of the viewer who is paying attention. The show cannot say, Homer Simpson has never had a fair chance at the life he could have had, because the system that shaped him was designed by the man who employs him to produce exactly the kind of person Homer has become. It can show you the crayon. It can show you the genius that emerges when the crayon is removed. It can show you Homer choosing the fog over the clarity. And it can let you sit with that choice and feel the specific weight of a decision made by someone who was broken before he had the resources to resist being broken. The show cannot say, Ned Flanders' faith is the most honest response available to a person in his position, in a universe where God talks to Homer and ignores the devout. It can show you both things, the divine conversation and the divine silence, and let the juxtaposition speak. The show cannot say, the children of Springfield are being failed by every institution that should be serving them, and the failure is not accidental, and the people responsible for it will never be held accountable, and the children will grow up to fail the next generation of children in the same ways, and the cycle is self-sustaining and deliberately maintained. It can show you Springfield Elementary. It can show you the inadequate textbooks and the exhausted teacher and the principal who is not who he says he is. And it can let you watch Bart sit in the back row and tell you, through every detail of his posture and his expression and his relationship to the institution around him, what the institution has done to him. The show cannot say, the love at the center of all of this is more important than the darkness, and is also insufficient to address the darkness, and is also the only thing that makes the darkness bearable, and is also something that Burns has never been able to take away even though he has taken almost everything else. It can show you Homer finding his way home, episode after episode, with the reliability of something that operates beneath the level of choice. It can show you the couch and the family and the specific warmth of a Sunday evening in a house that should not be able to survive what has happened to it and does. What the show cannot say is the thing we have been trying to hear for 36 years. The complete, unmediated truth of Springfield, spoken directly, without the comedy's softening, and without the format's constraints, and without the commercial considerations that govern what a network show can and cannot be. We have been trying to hear it in the theories, in the pattern recognition, in the careful assembly of evidence from hundreds of episodes into a coherent picture of what the show has been documenting, in the willingness to sit with the dark implications rather than letting the comedy provide the escape it is designed to provide. The show has been trying to say it. It has been trying to say it in every carefully placed detail, in every pattern that repeats across decades, in every moment when the comedy drops for just long enough to let something real surface before the comedy reasserts itself. What it is trying to say is something that does not compress into a single sentence. It is the complete picture, the contamination and the love and the institutional failure and the warmth and the exploitation and the specific impossible beauty of a family sitting on a couch in a town that should not be able to exist. And does. It is the full truth of a specific kind of American life, held up with the care and the wit and the 36 years of accumulated craft that the show has brought to the project of holding it up. And it is the acknowledgement, running beneath all of it, that the people living inside this life, the people of Springfield, the people who inspired Springfield, the people who recognize themselves in Springfield are more than the systems that shaped them, that the damage is real and the love is realer, that the limitations are real and the persistence against them is realer, that Burns won and Homer still goes home, that Maggie is still watching, that Lisa is still playing, that the couch is still there, and that we are still watching, which is the only thing the show has ever required of us and which is, in its way, the most complete expression of what 36 years of Springfield have produced in the people who watch them. We are still here. We came back. The loop held. That is the thing the Simpsons cannot say and has been saying, episode after episode, since the 17th of December, 1989. We heard it. We are still hearing it. Good night.